I'm posting this as a warning. There are things out there that you don't want to know about. Stay away from them. Don't go looking for them. I'll tell you my story in hopes that it will quench your curiosity. It was a night like any other night, at least lately. I had barely arrived at the ranger station and there were already 4 calls of vacationers' homes getting broken into. I'm out here in the West Virginia Wildlife Preserve. People tend to think that just because they plant some houses, that the animals should somehow know and respect boundaries. That's kind of tough when the animals are on a huge plot of land, where they've never been hunted, and never ever been threatened by anything other than a bigger animal. Folks seem to think this is a great vacation spot for them. What they don't realize is that it's also a great vacation spot for the animals. I hopped in the company truck and started towards my first destination of the night. An elderly couple had been terrorized by a deer that literally broke in through a sliding glass door. And they managed to trap it in a side room and needed someone to go release it. So I got elected. When I got there, the vacationers looked like the ones caught in headlights. They were still wide-eyed. I could tell that they were in shock. I had them go into another room and close the door. Once they were out of the way, I found the closest door to the outside and I opened it. Then I went to the room with the deer in it. I slowly opened the door and was shocked to find the room covered in blood. The deer was laying on the floor panting. I approached it slowly, circling around to leave the doorway open, hoping to give it an escape route. The closer I got, the more I realized that this deer wasn't going anywhere. Its side was covered with claw marks. At first, I thought a coyote had attacked it, but the marks were too far apart. They were large enough to be caused by a bear, but the individual claws were too far apart. I had never seen anything like it. If I had to compare it to something, I would say that Freddy Krueger had sliced it up. The deer's eyes went wide when I approached it, but it didn't jump up and run. I took this as a bad sign. Its breath came in ragged gasps as I struggled to roll it over. Once I did, it was my turn to struggle breathing. Its entire side was torn to shreds, but that wasn't the worst part. There were large chunks that were missing. I examined the wounds and found bite marks where the missing flesh should have been, but the bites were massive. If it wouldn't have challenged the laws of nature as well as my own sanity, I would have said that it was bitten by a shark. Red poured out of the side and the deer struggled to draw breath. I stood and left the room, leaving the poor creature the dignity of a private death. When I went back in, it was still. I took pictures with my cell phone and tried my best to carry the creature out without making more of a mess. After I got it loaded on the back of my truck, I went back inside and talked to the vacationers. When I opened the door to the room they were in, the woman's eyes grew wide, and she had started screaming. The man's eyes were the size of saucers as well. I approached them slowly with my arms outstretched to try and calm them down. It seemed to have the opposite effect. They started climbing the furniture and clawing at the walls to get away from me. I decided to back away and give them some room. "What's wrong?" I said. The man pointed a shaky finger at me. You're covered in blood," he said. "The deer got you," the woman said. "You've got rabies." "Or worse," the man said, keeping his distance. "I'm sorry, folks," I said. "This is the deer's blood." "You killed it just for breaking in," the woman said. "What? No, it was already injured. I only took it to my truck." The couple seemed to settle down and consider this. "So you don't have rabies?" the man said, slowly looking me up and down. "Or anything else," the woman said, hiding behind her husband. "No, ma'am, I'm fine." She took her turn, eyeing me up and down. I assumed, looking for any wounds. Being satisfied, they asked the one question I didn't want to answer. "So what killed the deer?" the man said. "I really don't know," I said truthfully. Having just gotten them calmed down, I didn't want to send them back into a panic. "It was probably just a coyote," I said. "A coyote?" the man said, diving back into the pool of panic. "Or a bear," I said, trying and failing to calm them. "A bear?" the woman said, diving in after her husband. "You know, folks, you've had a traumatic night," I said. "I can't tell you what to do, but if I were you, I would, we're leaving," the woman said, dragging her husband out of the room. "That sounds like a good idea," I said. And then like an idiot, I added, "Hope you enjoyed your stay." They either didn't hear me or they ignored me. Either way, it wasn't long until I heard a car start up and then roar away from the house. I went back into the room where the deer had been trapped and I started working backwards from there, trying to find out what had happened. It wasn't hard to pick up the trail. It had been bleeding pretty badly. Seeing the bites and claw marks made that fairly obvious too. I tracked it back through the kitchen and out the smashed glass door. Once outside, I turned on my flashlight. The trail was a little harder to follow, but not much. I could still see drops of red beside its tracks as I followed them back towards the pond behind the house. I approached the pond and saw signs of a struggle. This must have been where the deer was attacked at. There were other tracks in with the deer's, but they didn't make any sense to me. They were large, too large. Their shapes were odd as well. If I had to call them anything, I would have called them duck prints, but massive, larger than any duck by many times. A giant duck with shark teeth. I think I'll leave that out of my report, I thought. It suddenly struck me what the tracks were. It was a man with swim fins on his feet. But why? Why go to all that trouble to poach a deer when you can just knock it out with a tranquilizer gun? My mind sent me an answer, but I didn't like it. What if the man is a psychopath, just getting his kicks by killing an animal with his bare hands? I thought about the mental hospital in the neighboring county, and wondered if one of the patients had taken an unsanctioned leave of absence, and they were trying to keep it quiet. I didn't like that thought one bit. Aside from the fact that it didn't explain the huge bites in the deer, it also meant that we had someone who might suddenly get a taste for killing. Doing this to animals was horrible, but what if he decided to go after something bigger? I shot a look at the house, wondering how many vacationers were within a short walk from the spot, and how many were armed. As I contemplated the safety of the people in the area, I heard something behind me. I whipped around and shone my light but saw nothing. I scanned the pond and saw a ripple emanating from the middle, probably just a fish jumping. I took some more pictures of the struggle area with my phone, and then started back toward my truck. I had more calls to answer, and this riddle would have to wait. I drove halfway around the lake, around 3 miles to the other vacation home, where a break-in had been reported. When the woman in her 30s answered the door, she took a step back. "Oh my," she said, looking at the dried blood all over my uniform. "Good evening, ma'am. Sorry about my appearance," I said. "Did you happen to report a break-in?" "Yes, we did. Please come in," she said in a friendly tone, yet gave me a wide berth while closing the door. She led me upstairs to the kitchen. For some reason, I was expecting to find blood all over like with the last house. However, this was a completely different mess. She showed me the door. It had been forced open but not shattered like the last one. There was only a small amount of glass broken. And then the door latch had been unlocked and the door slid open. There were faint images of the giant duck tracks like the last house. My spine turned to ice. This house was over 3 miles away from the other, There were many more people in that space that might have fallen victim to this crazed person. The woman showed me the rest of the kitchen and the mess that had been left. There were a few cans of sardines that had been opened and eaten, and also some cans of tuna fish. The strange thing was how they were opened. The cans had been torn into with something sharp, but not a can opener. The marks looked like they were torn open with claws. I shuddered to imagine the amount of strength it took to do something like that. And then I spotted it. Beside one of the cans of tuna was a small puddle of blood. "Ma'am, could I trouble you for a sandwich bag?" I said. She handed me one, and I carefully tried to scrape as much of it into it as possible. I sealed it and put it in my pocket and then went out through the broken door. Behind the house, just like with most of these vacation houses, there was a pond. I traced the tracks back to it, and they disappeared at the waterline. I shone my light over the water, but the only thing I saw was a stray turtle. I stared at it for a long time, though, as though it would somehow give me a clue as to what was going on. "What should we do?" the woman said, nearly scaring me half to death. I hadn't heard her follow me out the door and into the yard. "I'll send someone around to look at that door in the morning," I said. "In the meantime, it might not be a bad idea to sleep in a room that has a lock on the door. I'm sure they won't be back, but just in case." She didn't seem very comforted by that idea, but thanked me as I left. The next two reports were just teenagers breaking in and stealing beer. That was it. No bloody wildlife, no weird tracks, just kids being kids. I went back to the station, changed out my uniform, and spent the rest of the night filling out reports on what had happened. When my shift was over and I passed on what had happened, I took a little trip to the neighboring county. I stopped in at the mental hospital and asked if they had any people escape lately. The nurse looked at me like I had asked her if she was wearing deodorant. "We don't have escapes," she said with obvious pride that showed as arrogance. I thanked her and left, feeling less than satisfied with her answer. Next, I stopped in at the local police department and asked one of my friends in the force if they could analyze the blood sample for me. I shared my thoughts that there might be an escapee from the mental hospital, and the blood sample might help us find out who and track him down. It was well past noon until I got to bed. That night, when I got to work, it was pandemonium. There had been more break-ins and people were starting to panic. The owner of the resort was frantic. People were canceling left and right and wanting their money back. When I walked in, he stormed his pudgy face right up into mine. "You told people to go home," he fumed, glaring up at me. I merely suggested, "Do you want to pay the rental out of your salary?" "I work for the state, not you," I said. He turned a deeper shade of red. "Would you rather see people in body bags instead of animals?" I said. "That wouldn't do much for business, now would it?" He turned a fire engine red and stormed out mumbling, "We'll see." I investigated 5 break-ins that night. Only 2 of them were legit. The rest seemed like half-hearted attempts to stage a break-in, so they could get out of paying for their own rental. The 2 real ones shared the same characteristics as before. Just enough of a broken window to open the door. The cans of whatever seafood was available. They even got shrimp out of the freezer. Everything about the way the intruder acted pointed to a person. All I needed to know was who. Again, I followed the tracks back to the nearby pond. I stood for a long time studying the surface of the water. I knew these ponds were all designed the same. A rough 40-yard by 40-yard body of water around 5 feet deep in the middle, stocked with mostly bluegill for catch and release fishing. Anybody using these ponds to hide would have to be holding their breath for inhuman periods of time. I stared at the surface for 20 minutes. If somebody was out there, they had an invisible snorkel or an extra set of lungs. After my rounds of investigating and reporting, I decided to stick around and do a little extra investigating. I ran home and grabbed my swim trunks, a mask, and a snorkel, and went to the site of the most recent break-in. I waded out into the water, unsure of what I would find when a snake slithered past me. I let it go and waded deep enough to where I could swim. I hovered at the level of the surface, dipping my mask underneath to get a glimpse of whatever there was to see. There wasn't much. Fish, underwater plants, and lots of water. Just what you would expect from a pond. As I kept going towards the middle, the water kept getting deeper. I now couldn't touch the bottom, so I had to float on the surface. Looming in front of me was a dark spot at the bottom of the pond. I took it for a rock, but swam close enough to investigate anyway. In for a penny, in for a pound. As I drew close enough to hover over it, I realized it wasn't a rock. I took a deep breath and dove to find out what it really was. The further I swam down, the further I was able to swim down. I kept going and going. Light disappeared. I was sure that I had been swimming straight down for a solid minute without touching the bottom. I turned and looked up. The surface of the pond was only a pinprick of light. My lungs screamed at me to turn around. I had no choice but to comply. I clawed at the water in desperation. It seemed like I was swimming in mud or something was pulling me down, almost like a force or a current pushing against me, wanting me to drown before I could fully explore this hidden secret. After what felt like an eternity, I broke the surface of the water and I gasped for air. I swam over to the shallows and walked out of the pond. I collapsed on the shore and lay there for a long time trying to regain my breath. As my brain received oxygen, I thought about what had happened and if it had been real, an illusion, or if I had just gotten turned around somehow and stuck at the bottom. I had to find out. I wasted no time driving 2 counties over and renting some dive equipment, along with a light. So armed, I returned to the pond and walked toward the middle again. This time, when I dove toward the dark spot, I was able to see exactly what it was. I used the flashlight to examine the darkness. As I swam deeper, the sides closed in on me as if I was swimming down the gullet of some massive fish. I've never been claustrophobic before, but that was rapidly changing. I barely had any room to maneuver as these sides closed in. I contemplated turning around, but there was no room. I could feel myself starting to panic. I had to focus to keep my breathing regular. I was very close to a panic attack when suddenly, the tunnel opened up again. The sides grew further apart and I checked my watch and I had been under for 15 minutes. The sides of the tunnel had spread out so far that they were barely visible, and I could see a light ahead of me. I swam toward it, desperate to get out of this water. I broke through the surface and looked around. I was in the pond. Somehow, I had gotten turned around and I was back in the pond. I swam to the side until I could stand and I walked out to the shore. Looking around, I made a startling discovery. I was in a pond, the same one as the break-in last night. Somehow, there was a hidden tunnel between the 2 ponds. That's how the robber never gets caught. He just swims to the next pond as slick as snot. No fuss and no muss. I now knew the how, but I needed to know more. As tempting as it was to swim back through the tunnel, I was still a little shaken and didn't want to risk an underwater panic attack. I walked back to my truck, took off my dive equipment, and drove back to the dive shop. I asked about frequent customers, especially for refilling tanks. They told me that they had a few regulars that came in every weekend, but no one knew and no one who needed refills more than once a week. I asked if there were any other dive shops in the area, and they told me that the next closest one was over 100 miles away. I went home frustrated. It wasn't making sense. He would need air to swim back and forth through that tunnel, and that was his escape route, I was sure of it. I tried to sleep through the afternoon, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. It was working on the impossible puzzle of how the robber was getting air. I borrowed a couple of trail cams and set one up at each pond. I needed to see if he had some new tank system or what. I also wanted to identify him and shut him down fast. I made sure to stay away from those ponds that night, so that he would feel free to do his thing. In the morning, I gathered the cameras and took them home. I downloaded both memory cards before watching the video. Just as the second download had finished, my phone rang. "Hello?" I said. "Hey John, it's Steve. I got the results from that blood you gave me the other day." "Great," I said, hitting the play button on my computer. "Were you able to get a match on any hospital records?" Not exactly." "Why not?" I asked as a ghostly green image appeared on my computer. The image was blurred, but it was definitely the size of a man walking upright toward the camera. I clicked to the next slide and froze at what I saw. "Well, the thing is, the blood you gave me came back as reptile DNA." I registered the words he said on my mind, just like I had registered the image on my computer screen, but I just couldn't place them in reality. "Are you there?" he said into the phone. "Yeah, I'm sorry," I said. "Could you send me a copy of your findings to my office?" "Sure, no problem." "Thanks, I appreciate it. You really helped me figure this out." "Anytime," he said cheerfully before hanging up. I hadn't taken my eyes off the computer screen the whole time. No matter how long I stared at it, I couldn't make my mind acknowledge that it was real. Standing there, large as life, was not a man in a wetsuit. It was a creature. I could see the wide mouth full of sharp teeth that looked exactly like the bites on the deer. I could see the webbed feet that looked like swim fins, only had claws sticking out of the front where toes would be. I saw the razor-sharp claws on its webbed hands. It was a full-on nightmare staring me in the face. I sat back and thought for a long time, and then I printed copies of the images and put them in an envelope. I rushed to the station to share the information that I had with my fellow rangers. As I was showing them, their faces ranged in emotions from shock to disbelief to outright mocking. As I was going through my investigation, the owner of the timeshares had walked in. "What are we all looking at?" he said, eyeing me with contempt. "Well, it seems like John has solved the case of the break-ins," one of the other rangers said. The owner approached. He picked up the lab report and read it, and then stared for a long time at the picture. "Do you know what this is?" he said absently. "I really don't know yet," I said. "I've never seen anything like it." He turned to me and smiled. "This is money," he said, holding up the picture. "What do you mean?" I said. "Those idiots that go around hunting, what do you call them? Cryptids?" "Yeah, cryptids. They'll pay through the nose if they think they can find something like this. And then there's the TV shows and the merchandising," he said. "You may have saved my financial hide." He beamed at me. "I don't think you understand," I said. "This is a dangerous animal. If you had seen what it did to that deer. So what do you want to do? Hunt it down and kill it. Maybe not kill it, but definitely tranquilize it and take it to a secure location where it can't hurt anyone." "You idiot," he yelled. "I could make a mint. I wouldn't even have to repair those houses. They would all rush in to investigate and leave piles of cash in my bank account." "But what about the people?" "Who cares about the people?" he said. "Throw them all out. I've got the chance of a lifetime beating down my front door, and you want to flush it down the toilet because you're scared as someone might break a nail." He was breathing hard and staring up into my face. The air was charged with fury, his and mine, and then a sudden calm came over him. "Charles," he said, addressing the lead ranger, "isn't this a wildlife preserve?" "Oh, yes it is," Charles said warily. "And aren't the wildlife on this preserve protected from all tampering by law?" "Well, I guess so," Charles said. "What if those animals present a threat?" I said to Charles. How many deer were killed by coyotes on this preserve last year? The owner said. Dozens, Charles said. Were the coyotes removed from the preserve? No, Charles said. The owner turned and shot me a triumphant look. John, Charles said, I know that you have everybody's best interests in mind, but you're gonna have to let this go. I glared at him. And what happens when this thing decides that it likes to eat humans? All the eyes in the room that had been on me suddenly found somewhere else to look. All but the owner. He was smiling ear to ear. I think the pudgy little guy was about to break into a happy dance. I searched the room for any support, but I found none. I pulled my badge off my shirt, quietly laid it on the desk, and laughed. If that was the end of my story, I would say that I had failed. I took my pension and rented one of the houses on the preserve. The owner had leaked through social media that a cryptid had been spotted on the preserve. As he had guessed, the cryptid hunters and TV crews came in droves, renting everything in sight. My goal was different, and I already knew that it existed. I knew it how it got around without being detected. I stayed at one of the break-in houses. Every night, I took a huge tuna that I had bought fresh that morning, and I laid it out beside the pond. I sat in the dark living room and watched the first night as it approached the fish with more caution than curiosity. After sniffing it for a long time, it grabbed it and dove for the pond. Each night after, I laid out a fish and the creature became less cautious. It was being fed and the media frenzy was starving. The hunters had found nothing. There were no sightings as long as I had fed it. Everyone had their cameras set up. The few that roamed around left me alone when they saw someone in the house. I guess they thought I was another cryptid hunter and respected my privacy. As the number of sightings stayed at 0, they started turning on the owner, calling him a fraud. His reputation had plummeted. After a week with no sightings, people started leaving. In desperation, he did the wrong thing. He hired an actor to dress in a creature suit and roam around. Of course, the hunters and shows saw right through this and destroyed what was left of his reputation. I had rented the house for 2 weeks. Between the rent and the fish, my money was running out. I had kept the people safe, but what would happen when I stopped feeding it? I had managed to clear out most of the people so they would be safe. But what about my fellow rangers? What would happen when it became desperate? When the starving creature no longer had houses full of food to break into, I had 3 more nights until I had to leave. I was out of money. The preserve had become a ghost town. As far as I knew, I was the only renter left. It was decision time. I was staring at the large tuna on the table with a bottle of bleach next to it. Let it live and see what happens, or kill it. I thought about this for a long time. Both options had merits and consequences. I chose a third option, a much more dangerous one. I took the fish out and I laid it where I usually did, and then backed up a few feet and stood there. Over an hour passed before the water stirred. I saw the head and eyes of the creature appear as it headed toward the fish, and then it stopped. It had seen me. I made sure to keep still with my arms at my side. It slowly approached and stood. It was a few feet away with the fish in between us. It studied me and sniffed the air and then became agitated. Perhaps it had smelled my scent before as a pursuer. It let out a soft hiss but bent down and took the fish, keeping its eyes on me the entire time. And then once it had had its meal, it did the most incredible physical display that I've ever seen. It leapt 20 feet in the air and landed in a perfect dive right in the middle of the pond, leaving almost no splash. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding, and I collapsed to the ground shaking. Once I had recovered, I went back inside and I fell into a fitful sleep. That was only part of my plan. The next night would decide who lived and who died. I did exactly like the night before, minus the fish. The creature approached, stepped up to me and looked around for the fish. I showed it my empty hands. It sniffed at them and growled, having smelled the scent of fish. It looked at my hands and I wondered if it was going to bite them off as a substitute. It hissed at me and sniffed my face. I saw it flexing its claws the whole time. I stared into its face, those massive, razor-sharp teeth, and swallowed hard. I did all I could do to stay still, to show it I wasn't a threat. And my heart hammered in my chest. It opened its jaws and showed me those horrible teeth. Its breath was a horrid stench I had never smelled and hoped to never again. I closed my eyes, not knowing if they would ever open. Seconds fell into minutes. I opened my eyes and I was alone. There wasn't even a ripple in the water. I sighed. My decision had been made. It had shown restraint and I would too. I went back inside, packed and left. I could only hope and pray that the people that remained, including my former coworkers, would be safe. I went home and slept restlessly. In the morning, there was a report in the newspaper on a break-in at the wildlife preserve. They said the only thing that was taken were cans of tuna fish. I smiled ruefully and wondered how long it would stay that way. If you're reading this, don't go looking for this thing. If you see it, don't tell others about it. Just to leave it alone and hope for the best. Today's episode is sponsored by Factor. Eating better is easy with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian approved, and ready to go in just 2 minutes. You'll have over 35 different options to choose from, such as the creamy mushroom chicken and rice, or the Cavatapian Italian-style pork ragu. Sounds pretty good to me. And again, these meals are ready to go in minutes, so they are perfect for the day-to-day busyness that we all have. And Factor is less expensive than takeout, and every meal is dietitian approved to be nutritious and delicious. Just head to factormeals.com/MrCreeps50 and use code MrCreeps50 to get 50% off. That's code MrCreeps50 at factormeals.com/MrCreeps50 to get 50% off. I'm a park ranger, but I'm leaving my name and the name of the park out of this post intentionally. The names of all those involved have been changed as well. I needed to get this story out there but cannot rely on conventional avenues, so that's why I'm posting it here. I could lose my job or much worse, but this story has to be told. I owe it to Catherine. I arrived at the ranger station like any other day. I was given my section of the park to patrol. Unfortunately, the park is massive and my section usually includes about half of it, so there isn't much chance for leisurely strolls on the trails. I hopped in my work vehicle, a 10-year-old 4x4, and headed out to see if anybody needed assistance. It didn't take long to find someone. At the first campground, there was a man who couldn't get his camper started. A quick jump got him up and rolling. Next was a couple needing directions, then an overturned canoe. I had only made it a few miles through the park. I was going to have to move if I hoped to make a full route today. I managed to grab a few quick bites of lunch and put some miles on without anyone needing help when the call came over the radio. There was a hiker that found something and I needed to go check it out. A half hour later, I was talking to a middle-aged woman who had made a concerning discovery. She found a hat and a note on the trail. I read the note. I'm writing this note and leaving it behind because I'm not sure what's happening. The 5 of us friends have been planning this trip forever, ever since long before we had graduated. But it always seemed like something came up at the last minute, and one or more of us couldn't go. For a while, I was almost convinced that some outside force was working against us, that we were cursed to not go camping together until we were all too old to enjoy it. I could picture Devin now. He would still go even if he was so old that he had to use a walker on the trail. He's always up for camping. I think the guy carries a loaded backpack in his car with him everywhere that he goes. Adrienne got here right behind us, followed soon after by Dean. Of course, Terry was the last one to show. And we started up the trail in great spirits. 3 miles and the sun was just starting to heat up. We were making good time towards the rustic campground when Devin decided to take a detour. He said that he had heard about an old trail that no one used anymore, and he wanted to check it out. I said that we should just keep going the way that we were, but I was outvoted. I honestly don't think Terry's vote should have counted, since he was obviously stoned and Devin just bullied him into saying yes. We came to a spot with a large stone off to the side of the trail. Devin said that it was the trailhead, but I didn't see any trail. He led us through some heavy brush, but on the other side it cleared out and we could see the faint impression of an overgrown trail. I went last and left my hat on the stone in case we got lost and needed to be rescued. I think that's exactly where we're heading, straight toward Lost. I'll leave this note under my hat and hope that somebody finds it. I asked the woman to show me where she had found it and she showed me. 3 miles later, I was staring at the rock that I hoped I would never see again. I radioed my location to the station and told them that if they didn't hear from me in a couple of hours to send a search party to the old abandoned trail. I wish I would have brought my supplies with me, my backpack and my sidearm, but they were 3 miles away and I didn't know how long these kids had been on this trail. I knew that wasted time could mean the difference between life and death. At least I had my knife, a flashlight, and binoculars. So I thanked the woman, placed the red hat back on the stone just in case, and headed into the heavy brush. Once through the initial overgrowth, the trail became visible. Old memories flashed through my head, ones that I never wanted to think of again. I took a deep breath and I headed down the trail. It was overgrown for the first mile or so and then it opened up into a field. I could see people had walked through before me by the way the weeds were partially trampled. As I walked through, a deer jumped ahead of me, startling me. Until that moment, I didn't realize how jumpy I was. I tried to settle down and tell myself that these kids were just lost and that I could catch up to them and get them out. And telling myself that didn't make the memories go away. I entered a clearing with a fallen log and another note with a rock sitting on it. Okay, I think I'm being silly. This trail isn't so bad. Maybe I was wrong. Devin seems to know where he's going. I just can't shake this feeling that we're being watched. Sometimes I'll look around and I swear that I see a face disappear behind a tree. Am I being paranoid? Maybe if the birds would start singing again, that would lighten my mood. But I haven't heard a bird or any other animal for a while. I wonder why they're being so quiet. Are they afraid of us? On another note, Terry seems to be brooding more than usual. Maybe he forgot to bring enough of his stash to last the trip. Devin is in his glory since everybody has to rely on him for directions. Adrienne and Dean seem to be along for the ride, although I have noticed Dean looking around at the trees as well. Maybe I'll ask him if he sees anything. If you're trying to track us down, I hope we aren't being too much of a bother. I just have this feeling. I folded the note and stuck it in my pocket, and then prayed she was wrong about being followed. I pushed on, beginning to miss my backpack with these supplies in it, especially the water bottles. The trees provided some shade so the sunlight wasn't shining directly on me, but hiking is always thirsty work. The birds chirping in the trees made me almost forget about the desperate mission that I was on to save these 5 kids. My mind wandered back to the kid that I couldn't save. It had been shortly after I had started as a park ranger. An 11-year-old boy had gotten lost on this very trail. His parents searched frantically for him before calling us to look. I remember hoping to be the one to find him, as we formed search parties and searched on, in and around every inch of the trail. In the end, I got my wish. I found him, but I wish I hadn't. I pushed the memory to the back of my mind and I focused on the trail. It was starting to fade. The trampling of feet wasn't making enough of a difference and I was starting to lose my way. Out here, that can be deadly. I kept moving forward and finally regained the trail just in time to reach the fork. I looked back and forth from one choice to the other and couldn't see a difference between the two. I searched for any broken twigs or plants that would give me a hint, but there were none. Just when I was about to give up and flip a coin, I saw a piece of paper in the weeds, barely visible. I dug it out and I read it. Okay, it seems like we have a dilemma. A fork in the road, as it were. You would think that I would be happy to see the doubt in Devin's eyes as he looked from one choice to the other, but you'd be wrong. It made my confidence plummet. It made me think that we were never getting out of here. Everyone's running out of water. Devin yelled at us for not conserving, but I saw him drink the last of his too. He ranted and raved at us for a while, but we all knew that he was just mad because he didn't know what to do. In the end, he flipped a coin. We all did our best not to laugh. Adrienne is reaching the end of her rope with Devin and his attitude. Dean has been playing peacemaker, trying to keep them from going at it too much. Terry has been way too quiet. I haven't seen him light up once. Something's up with him, but every time I ask, he says that it's nothing. The birds still aren't singing and it's starting to really bother me. The strange feeling that I have hasn't gone away. I asked Dean if he had seen anything strange, but he won't talk about it. We've been on this trail for a while. I'm hoping to come to the end soon. By the way, in case the note got moved or blown around, we took the left trail. I was panicked by the end of reading that note and so relieved she mentioned which trail to take. I radioed in and reported that I was on the trail of the missing hikers. I mentioned the fork and taking the left side. I was told that there was no search party going on yet, and that I was the only one looking for these kids. It was the complete opposite of years ago looking for that kid. Everyone was searching. I know that we combed every inch of that wilderness. But that's the thing about the woods. You can search every nook and cranny, but something can still stay hidden. The sun was going down and I still had no idea how close I was to catching up to these kids. I could stumble across them in the next clearing, or they could be hours ahead of me. I met with the woman who showed me the hat and the note in the afternoon. If they started out around daybreak, they could be a good 5 or 6 hours ahead of me. If the leader is so driven to continue, it's hard to say how far they might be. I continued following the trail until I came to a fallen tree across a river. I looked both ways along the edge of the water but saw no trail, so I made my way across the tree. I could picture the debate the kids had when they got here. I chuckled at the thought of Devin having to convince them to go across. I believe I made up a lot of time with that single crossing. I jumped onto the water and drank my fill, and then climbed back up, feeling much better. It was tough to pick up the trail on the other side, so I was glad to find a note sticking to a branch. Oh my gosh, Devin just about came unglued when he got to that tree over the river. He hopped up on it right away and started across, but the rest of us weren't so sure that the trail led that way. We asked him how the trail could be planned with a fallen tree as a part of it. He sputtered and stopped and told us how lost we'd be without him. Dean had finally had enough and told him that we were lost because of him. I seriously thought that Devin was going to take a swing at him, until Terry of all people came to his side and told Devin to shut up. The rest of us all came together and told Devin that he could keep leading us as long as he stopped acting like a petty tyrant. Well, he didn't take that well. In the end, he told us that we could all go to heck. He sat on the log and refused to move. Eventually, after we took a break and refilled our water bottles on the river, Dean said that we should get going and let us across the tree. Devin followed along, acting like a whipped puppy. Dean and I talked about the disappearing face that we had seen a while back, but neither of us had seen it again. At least the birds are back to singing though. I chuckled, figuring that Devin would be a big baby over the whole thing. But after the chuckle came concern. Disposed leaders are usually dangerous. I wondered how much offense Devin had taken and if he would be looking to get some payback in some small or large way. And darkness was coming on fast in the woods, so I had to make a decision. Camp for the night or keep going. If I camped, I could defend against the predators that lurked in the darkness. But if I kept moving, there would be a good chance that I could stumble across the group before daybreak. It wasn't much of a decision. These kids that I didn't even know that I had plunged headfirst into the woods without even my backpack of supplies. Of course, I was going to try to catch up with them. If I had done that years back, would that kid still be alive? Such thoughts nagged at me. Most days I kept them at bay, but here in this same forest, close to these spots where I found them, I needed to focus. If I'm going to keep after them, then I need to get going. I stepped off the trail to go to the bathroom, and I heard a metallic snap at the same time. I felt an intense pain shoot up my leg. I looked down and yep, I had stepped into a bear trap. I screamed and fell to the ground and rocked back and forth in agony. After a few minutes, I focused on getting the trap off my leg. I found a branch and I pried the trap open, screaming the entire time. I managed to pull the trap off my leg and I threw it to the side. I really didn't want to take my boot off, but I had to see the damage. It took every ounce of effort that I could muster to unlace the boot and pull it off. My leg was purple. I felt along the wound very gently, but there didn't seem to be any break. That didn't mean that I wasn't going to be limping for the next month though, but it did mean that I would buy this brand of boots for the rest of my life. It took much more effort and some more screaming to put the boot back on, but I knew that I needed to keep moving. I laced up the boot and found a sturdy branch to use as a crutch. I struggled to my feet and took my first few ginger steps. Once I got into a rhythm, it got easier, but I couldn't walk as fast as I had been. Of course, when I was at my weakest was when I heard footsteps in the trees close to me. I knew there was a predator around just because it could sense that I was vulnerable. I leaned against a tree and held my crutch ready as a weapon. The footsteps came closer. They paused as if they knew that I was ready, and then they slowly continued stalking me. They were deliberate but slow. Each step seemed measured, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. I heard it right next to the tree that I was hiding behind. I whipped around as best as I could and I raised my crotch to strike. A deer stared at me for a heartbeat and then turned and ran through the forest. I collapsed against the tree and slid down to the ground, allowing the adrenaline to bleed off. I don't remember falling asleep. I woke to sandpaper scraping the side of my face. I opened my eyes and there was a bear beside me licking my cheek. I freaked out, screamed, and rolled away from it. The bear wasn't ready for that reaction, so it startled and it ran away. I slowed my rapid breathing and I looked around. It was dark. There were thin shafts of moonlight beaming through the trees, providing a little light. I checked my watch and it was nearly 4 in the morning. I rose slowly and gingerly on my injured ankle, took the small flashlight out of my pocket, and prayed that it still worked. My prayers were answered when the beam shone brightly through the woods. I panned around slowly, trying to get my bearings. After a moment, I found the trail and I started hobbling towards it. The nightly noises were a comfort, at least if the crickets were chirping, and the rest of the forest was singing its nightly tune. That meant predators weren't around. I stumbled and fell, hitting my injured ankle against a rock. The pain overwhelmed me and I screamed. After a few minutes of recovery, I got up and continued at a slower pace, paying more attention to the ground. I chided myself for falling asleep and losing so much time. At least the trail was easy to follow. I continued on through the night, hoping that I wasn't too late. I started thinking about the boy that I had failed to rescue, and what would happen if I failed to rescue these kids. I'm sure the Rangers department would say that I did my best. I wasn't worried about them, it was me. Would I be able to forgive myself for letting something happen again? My thoughts were interrupted when I stumbled into a clearing. Not just any clearing. They were the remnants of a fire. There were impressions from tent pegs being pulled out of the ground. All around were these signs of a very recent campsite, including a tent that was still set up. I got so excited that I nearly fell over my crotch looking around for signs of anything. The tent was a mixed blessing. It was very ominous that it was still here while the others were gone, but I was able to find some supplies to take along for my search. The most important was food. I shoved some protein bars in my pocket while devouring some beef jerky. I also grabbed 2 bottles of water from the pack. I stumbled across a note sitting under a rock beside the smoldering fire. Before I sat, I held my hand out to the fire. It was still warm, but the embers were nearly dead. It had been hours since it was first lit. If I hadn't taken my unintentional nap, I would have caught up with them. There was nothing that I could do but sit by the dying fire and read the note, hoping that there was good news. We found this clearing and decided to camp. Everyone was tired from walking and the mood was somber because no one seemed to know where we were. All of us had been hiking in this forest before, but none of us had ever seen or heard of this trail. We set up our tents and started a fire, and then had some supper and sat around. No one really felt like talking, so I tried to get the ball rolling by asking Terry why he was late. He hesitated, but at my prompting eventually, he told us that he had hit an animal with his car on the way here. I asked if it was a deer and he said, no, it was way too big to be a deer. He said that it walked upright on 2 legs and that it was massive, like 8 feet tall covered in brown hair. He had swerved to miss it, but the strangest thing was, it seemed to try to jump in front of him anyway, like it wanted him to stop. We all listened with rapt attention. Just then, off in the distance, we heard a scream. We all froze. Devin started spouting off and yelling at Terry for trying to scare us, and then he stormed off. Dean tried to stop him, but he pushed him away and disappeared in the woods. The rest of us talked, trying to decide if we should go look for him, but in the end, we figured that we should just let him go and cool off. A short while later, we heard a rustling off in the distance and a muffled cry. We huddled a little closer together and went on high alert. Our eyes darted back and forth as we searched the impenetrable wall of trees surrounding us, looking for any sign of a predator. Right then, the strangest thing happened. All the nightly noises stopped. The crickets, the squirrels, the owls, every sound that you usually hear in the forest at night, simply ceased. It was unnerving. For a moment I wondered if I hadn't gone deaf. Our eyes darted all around us in the darkness. We huddled closer to the fire. Dean pulled out his hunting knife. None of us said a word. It was like if we spoke, something bad would happen. Somehow whatever caused the noises to stop, it would find us if we spoke. Someone did speak though, just not who we expected. "Why are you here?" came a raspy and deep voice that seemed to echo from everywhere. We looked all around and finally a man stepped into the light. He was large, well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, and older, maybe in his 50s or 60s. He was also wearing a park ranger's uniform. It looked old and shabby, like he had been wearing it for a long time. There were no name tag or park patches either. At that point, we didn't care. We had been rescued. We clamored around him, saying how glad we were that he had found us. We told him about going on the trail and how we weren't sure where we even were. The man listened and then slowly said, "You shouldn't be here." We all looked at each other, and I'm sure the others thought the same as me. No crap, we shouldn't be here. We just told you that. He continued to look at us from one to the other as though sizing us up. I was starting to get a little uncomfortable with the silence. I would have thought that he would offer to guide us, but he didn't. He kept staring. I think everyone else was getting a little edgy as well, when Dean asked if he could point us in the right direction. He looked at Dean as if deciding to answer him or not. "I can guide you," he said, "but first you should have some rest." We all agreed that the day had been long and stressful, and we decided to take his advice and turn in. We offered him some food and water, but he refused, saying that he wasn't hungry. We each went to our tents and we laid down. Before I settled in and finished this note, I popped my head back out of my tent to check on our guide. He was sitting by the fire, staring into the orange coals. I thought that I heard him mumbling or maybe humming something softly. I quietly zipped up my tent and went to sleep. Sometime later, somebody banged at my tent. I woke and unzipped it to find the ranger with a strange look in his eyes. "We need to go." "Why?" I said, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes. "It's not safe here," he said with an edge of panic in his voice. I popped back into my tent to change, and then came out and met with everyone. They were all in states of semi-consciousness as well. Everyone but the ranger seemed to be confused. "Pack it up, we need to leave," he said a little more forcefully. I was about to protest when I heard a piercing scream in the distance. His head shot up and he stared in the direction of the sound. "Move it," he said. "Pack up." We didn't need to be told again. The scream brought us all fully awake. We tore down our tents in record time and packed everything into our backpacks. As I was finishing up, I noticed Devin's tent was still up. "Where's Devin?" I said. "Who's Devin?" the ranger said. "He's another one of our friends. He went off into the woods alone right before you got here." "He didn't come back," the ranger said. "Well, should we go look for him?" The ranger extended his arms and did a slow circle. "Which way would you go?" he said. I understood his point. How would we know where he had gone? If he was still on the path or not? It just seemed like we should do something. "What about his gear?" I said. "Do we take it with us?" The ranger looked at me like he was annoyed at having to answer such questions. "No, leave it here in case he comes back," he said. "He'll need his supplies." I'm not sure if I'll keep leaving notes or not now that we have the ranger to guide us. Whoever finds this, please look for Devin and make sure that he's okay. A ranger. All the rangers at this park are in their 30s or 40s. Maybe it was someone who retired and was just roaming around out there. But why would he be in a ranger outfit? I'm sitting here by the dying embers of the fire with the tent set up in front of me. It was very tempting to take a rest. If they're in the hands of a capable ranger, I could get some rest before the long hike back out of here. But I knew that I had already taken my rest for the night. If not for that, I would have been here hours ago, probably before the other ranger. I set out again, feeling tired but determined. The campsite made me more hopeful than I had been all day. At least they were together and thinking like campers. If only I knew who this ranger was. The sun was an hour away from rising, so I took out my flashlight to follow the trail. I zipped up the tent before I left, just in case its owner did come back. I wouldn't want animals getting in and taking everything. It's bad enough when injured park rangers do it. The trail stayed level for a while as dawn peeked over the trees. The trail started heading upward, which was bad news for me and my bum ankle. It made things harder, but I had my trusty makeshift crutch to help me. Dawn crept into the forest, giving me a little assistance. At least I wouldn't have to waste a hand holding a flashlight. As the climb grew steeper, the trail grew more narrow. At times, it was only the width of 1 foot. I held onto trees and whatever I could as I scaled the extremely narrow trail. At the most difficult, I paused and seriously considered turning back. As I looked around for any other way to keep going, I saw a brightly colored fabric at the bottom of the ravine. I carefully balanced as I took out my binoculars and I looked. It was a backpack, and attached to it was the body of a girl in her early 20s. She looked like she had hit her head on the rocks at the bottom, her face not looking much better. Her clothes were ripped and soaked in red. There was no doubt that an animal had gotten to her. The only question was she alive when it had started feeding on her? I looked away but felt my determination double to find these missing kids. They might be with a ranger, but they were still in terrible danger. I slowly continued up the narrow trail. At times I was sure the ground would give out from under me, and that I would share the same fate as the poor unfortunate girl at the bottom of the ravine. It was then that I remembered my radio. I tried to call in and report the location of the body, but the only response that I got was static. I determined to try again when I got to the top of the trail. It was yet another motivation to keep going, to be careful and to survive. It seemed like hours at a snail's pace, working my way up the side of that ravine. Finally, I clawed my way over the edge to the top. I rolled over onto solid ground and lay there for a few minutes. Once I caught my breath, I got up slowly and painfully. I hadn't done my ankle any favors. I limped toward what looked like the trail and I began following. It wasn't long before I came across the remnants of another campsite. The fire was a little warmer than the last one. I stoked it up, threw some more wood on, and got it going. I knew that I needed some rest. I searched around and found a note, and then sat down on a log by the fire to read it. I can't believe Adrian's gone. We had started up this steep ravine and the trail kept getting more narrow. I asked the ranger if there was any other way around, but he just glared at me and said no. We all struggled with our heavy packs on our backs. At one point, I was on all fours, just trying to keep from sliding into the ravine. And that's when it happened. Adrienne was having trouble keeping her feet on the trail. She kept slipping. I reached out and helped her balance a few times. Being right in front of me, I kept an eye on her whenever I could. That wasn't nearly as much as I wanted because I was watching my own feet. She slipped once and I tried to grab her, but she had tipped over and the weight of her backpack had dragged her over the side. I watched in horror as she had tumbled down into the ravine, bouncing off trees as she went. I saw her skull make a solid impact several times as she tumbled to the bottom and slid to a stop. I couldn't see if she was still breathing or not as I called her name. She didn't move. I called for the ranger in front of us and I pointed to her unmoving body. He stared at her for a long time. I don't know if he was trying to see if she was alive or not, but he told us to keep going up the trail to the top and that he would go and check on her. I watched as he carefully made his way back down to the nearly sheer slope. We kept moving forward as instructed. He was only halfway down when we had made it to the top. I was a wreck. I was so happy that we had made it, but sad for Adrienne. I didn't hold out much hope that the ranger was going to come trotting into camp with her on his back, saying that she had only had a few bumps and scratches. We started a fire and then sat around it in a stupor. Finally, Terry came over and talked to me. Look, I understand she was your friend, but she was ours too, he said. We need to work together to get out of here. For them. That's so stupid that it makes sense, I said with the remnants of a smile. It was then the ranger had reappeared. He sat by the fire and didn't say a word. There was something in his eyes. It wasn't sadness, but I don't know exactly what it was. We knew that she wasn't coming back. We rested for a little while, and then started out on the trail again. If you're following us, I hope you're being careful. Stay safe. Wow, this girl is something else. With all she's gone through, she still wants me to be safe. I hope that I find her. I think she would make a good ranger. My guilty conscience jumped up on my back and yelled at me. How can you sit around and rest when that poor girl just lost her friend and needs your help? I knew that it was right. I just didn't know why that other ranger was being so careless. I struggled to get up, kicked out the fire and started after them. The daylight was dimming, but it was only 8 in the morning. I looked up and saw why. Storm clouds were overtaking the sky, yet another reason I wish that I would have brought my backpack. The raindrops hit like a cold slap in the face. Even though it was still September, out here in the mountains the weather can change in a heartbeat. We weren't at the top of the mountain, but in the middle was enough for the weather change to make me shiver. Now that we were out of the ravine, I tried my radio again, but it was just static. I knew that there were some places where the radio inexplicably wouldn't work. I just hoped to get away from the interference before it was too late. The trail was clear in front of me, but that was little comfort when walking in open fields with no rain cover. All those trees that I tromped through, and now in the rain, I have wide open spaces. I would say that someone doesn't like me. The rain just didn't pass like a spring shower. It poured so hard that it became difficult to see in front of me. For a long time, I trudged through the rain. At times, it felt like I was walking in place. The mud was starting to cake on my boots, and then my salvation appeared. In front of me on the trail was a tent. I called out before I unzipped the tent and I let myself in. I flopped down to the wonderful dry floor, and then quickly turned and zipped the entrance back up. I breathed a sigh of relief, but as I did, a stench hit my nose. I looked over at the sleeping bag and it was full. "Hey, I'm sorry to barge in like this, but I needed to get out of the rain," I said. No response. I nudged the person in the bag. It tipped to the side and rocked right back. And that's when I noticed the splotches of red that had soaked through the bag. I didn't want to see, but I pulled the top of the sleeping bag away from the person's face. The bad part was how they no longer had a face. It had been ripped away and the neck had been gouged out. There were large wounds on the body as well. I tried to feel for a pulse, but when my fingers went straight into the muscles of the neck, I figured there was no pulse to feel. I wiped my fingers on the sleeping bag and pondered why this person was covered. I know the animal who did this didn't gently cover up the person with a sleeping bag when it was done. I found my answer laying above the head of the person. It was a note. "I can't believe Terry's dead. I wish that I had never come on this trip. I wish that I had never let Devin bully us into turning down this trail. Where the heck is Devin anyway? When he stormed off on his little pity party, did he run across whatever creature had been stalking us? Is he sitting back in his tent now enjoying himself? I really don't know." We were enjoying not climbing up the face of the ravine, but we were very tired. I mentioned stopping and camping for a little bit to the ranger. He looked around and even sniffed the air. That seemed like a weird thing to do, but after that he agreed to let us set up camp. He even told us to do it as quickly as we could. We gathered wood for a fire, but he told us not to bother because the rain was coming. I guess that explains the sniffing the air thing. Our tents had been up maybe 15 minutes when it had started raining. It quickly turned into a downpour. We all offered the ranger to sit in our tents with us, and he looked over us one by one. It was kind of creepy. Finally, he said that he would sit with Terry in his tent, and Dean and I looked at each other with a relieved expression. The ranger's helping us, but he isn't someone that I would like to ever see again. He acts too weird. At times I wonder if he's really even helping us. I had just closed my eyes, listening to the rain on the tent and letting it carry me off to dreamland, when the ranger had ripped open my tent. He said that we needed to pack up and leave right now, that something was hunting us. We dove out into the rain and miserably packed our tents. He reassured us that there was a nice cave nearby and that we could get shelter there. As I was packing up, I didn't see Terry, so I went over to his tent and knocked. When there was no answer, I went in and found what was left of his body. Something had torn him to shreds. I covered my mouth to keep from vomiting and ran out to tell the others. Dean and the ranger looked in and saw that there was no helping him. The ranger said that he had left the tent to go to the bathroom, and when he came back, he saw a predator hanging around the tents. That's when he came to wake us up. I must have already gotten to Terry. I pulled his sleeping bag over his head and wished that we had time to give him a proper burial, but the ranger said the animal might be back for the rest of us, so we quickly packed and left. I barely had time to finish the note. Please help us. A cave? What kind of ranger is he? Doesn't he realize that would be the most likely place a large predator would call home? I thought for a moment what cave he could be talking about. I hadn't been on this trail for 5 years, ever since I found the kid here. And then it hit me. We were very close to the place where we had found him. Why would he take them there unless? I jumped up so quickly that I nearly fell on top of the body when I forgot, and put too much weight on my injured ankle. I hobbled out of the tent and went as quickly as I could toward the place that I swore I would never see again. I approached the cave and my heart sank. 2 backpacks sat just inside the entrance. I pulled out my knife and flashlight, and then cautiously peeked inside. I felt a change in the breeze and turned to find the ranger staring at me. I looked him up and down. "You," I said. "The last time I saw you was when we found the boy." He said nothing. "It was never a random animal attack," I said. "It was you." He took a step toward me. "Of course it was," he said. "How wonderful was it to watch you years ago as you floundered around, looking for some predator that stood beside you." "You." I pulled out my knife and held it ready. He paused and then smiled. "Do you really think that knife can hurt me?" I looked at it. "I'm pretty sure," I said. "It's made of iron." His smile vanished. "So you do know what I am." I pulled out a bottle of brown water. "I made sure to grab some runoff from the rainstorm," I said. "It might not do as good as rust water, but let's find out." I opened the bottle and I threw some water at him. He dodged it as though it was acid. At the same time, I swung with the knife. He dodged with ease. "Why don't you turn into what you truly are?" I said, taunting him. "Oh, because we both know when I transform, I'm vulnerable for a moment," he said. "And I'm sure you would like to take advantage of that vulnerable moment." He swung and connected with my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. I recovered and swung the knife in a vicious downswing at him, which he easily dodged. I kept moving forward, stabbing and slashing at him, but I couldn't get close enough to connect. He was too fast. "You can't defeat me," he said. "Look at you, like an injured deer just waiting to be devoured." "Be quiet, ye Nadlushi," I yelled. At the mention of his name, he froze. I knew that I didn't have much time. I took advantage of the moment, lunging at him with my knife. If I had been uninjured, I would have closed the distance between us with 2 quick steps and buried the knife in his heart. But unfortunately, in the heat of the moment, I forgot about my injured ankle. I stepped forward on my good leg, and then faltered when I tried to put weight on the injured one. Instead of burying the knife in his heart, it went through his left thigh. He screamed in pain and ran out of the cave. I took out my flashlight and started toward the back of the cave. There I found a body next to a pile of bones. There was a note in her hand, and I sat down, took it, and read. "I can't believe how stupid I was not to see this sooner. All the time, guiding us was just a play. He never wanted to help us. He never cared about any of us or our safety. I need to write this quickly before he comes back. The ranger led us here and told us to wait, that we would be safe in the cave. He left us alone." Dean pulled out his flashlight and explored deeper into the cave. He found a large pile of bones, and off to the side of them was a pile of clothes. We ran toward the opening, but the ranger had returned. "So, you didn't listen," he said, leering at us. "I told you to stay here and not explore my home." "What are you?" I said. He smiled for the first time since I had met him, but his smile wasn't comforting. It was terrifying. I watched in horror as he changed into a giant cat creature. It didn't look quite like a panther or a mountain lion, but he lunged at us with amazing speed. He grabbed my leg and tore a large gash in it. I fell to the floor, screaming. Dean tried to defend me, swinging his knife around and holding it at bay, but it stalked around him and cornered him. He only had one chance. He looked at me with sadness in his eyes and then ran past the creature and out of the cave. It looked at me and my leg and then sprinted out after Dean. I know why he did it. He was trying to give me time to escape, but with my leg, there was no way that I could outrun that thing. What he actually did was give me time to say goodbye. So if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I led you to your death. If you do somehow survive and make it out of here, please tell their families what really happened. Goodbye. I fought back tears as I read the final words of this brave girl. I limped to the front of the cave and looked out as the rain had stopped. It was like seeing a new world being born. I tried my radio and got an immediate answer. I gave them my GPS coordinates and told them to prepare for casualties. I'm still a park ranger even months later. I made sure that the trail was sealed off too. I carry an iron knife and rust water with me at all times. I carry the rust water and a squirt gun just in case. The bones were removed from the cave and subjected to DNA testing. Aside from this group of victims, including Devin, there were other people who had gone missing in the park over the years. The official version of the events was that a rogue animal had been hunting people. I was told that it would be best for my career if I didn't reveal the true nature of the predator. I still search for the creature and post signs everywhere to be on the lookout for an older ranger wearing a uniform with no patches on it. There's a number to call if anyone spots him. It's my personal cell number. From time to time, I hear reports of a large cat that's limping on its hind leg. I try to make my way to that spot as quickly as possible, but I have yet to catch him. I posted this story in memory of that brave girl, but also as a warning. Never go on an unposted trail, and beware of those you meet in the woods, even if they wear a uniform. Ever tried to break a bad habit and felt like you're climbing Everest in flip-flops? Yeah, we've been there too. But here's a breath of fresh air. Fume. It's not about giving up, it's about switching up. Fume takes your habit and simply makes it better, healthier, and a whole lot more enjoyable. Fume is an innovative, award-winning, flavored air device that does just that. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses delicious flavors. Now I'm sure you're probably wondering about the taste, and the first time I tried it, I actually really enjoyed it. It's a lot more flavorful than you would think, and it feels very fresh. And also the device, while holding it in your hand, it has movable parts that are designed for fidgeting. It gives your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your habit. Start the year off right with the good habit by going to tryfume.com/MrCreeps and getting the journey pack today. Fume is giving listeners of the show 10% off when they use my code MrCreeps to help make starting the good habit that much easier. I would like to take a minute to talk about this week's sponsor, Upside. Upside is an amazing free application that lets you earn cash back just for purchasing the things that you already do on a weekly basis, like gas or groceries. It's super simple to use and you'll quickly notice the benefits. My only regret is not downloading Upside sooner. Now with every purchase that I make, I'm earning cash back thanks to Upside. I may have mentioned this before, but there's an awesome little restaurant right by my house, and with the Upside app, I'm getting 7% cash back every time that I eat there. Not only is the food delicious, but I feel great about saving some money in the process. To get started, download the free Upside app and use my promo code MrCreeps and get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Next, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. Check in at the business, pay as usual with a credit or debit card and get paid. In comparison to credit card rewards or loyalty programs, you can earn 3 times more cash back with Upside. Upside users are earning more than $1 million every week. That's probably why they have a 4.8 star rating in the App Store. Download the free Upside app and use promo code MrCreeps to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That's $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Using promo code MrCreeps. I must be going crazy. I can see a town that doesn't exist. My name is Samuel Baker. I'm a Yellowstone National Park Ranger and I need some advice. I've spent my entire career fighting wildfires for the National Park Service, and after 2 decades in the field, I thought that I had seen everything. Then about 4 hours ago, an entire town just appeared in the middle of Yellowstone National Park, and the other ranger and I are the only ones who've been in it. We're not alone, however, as you might expect from something appearing out of nowhere inside one of America's most famous parks. The town is home to many people, some of whom who have been there for years. They all seem perfectly normal, but they aren't aware that they live inside a national park. My partner Thomas was the first to notice the town. He had driven into the valley a few hours before dawn one morning and saw a brand new sign on the road. "Welcome to Hungry Horse," it read. When he drove past the next bend in the road, he saw the motel. That's when he turned around to come and get me. The two of us had driven up the valley together in our trusty old Chevy Blazer and taken the long way around because we didn't want to pass through the town until we were sure of what it was. We parked at the base of the mountain and hiked up. We walked across the railroad tracks and past a small gas station with a lone oil drum full of diesel fuel and another filled with water. The street was lined with old cars, some of which looked like they had been there for a while, others which had probably just arrived that morning. Hungry Horse wasn't a ghost town, or even abandoned. It was thriving. Thomas and I entered the town cautiously, because despite appearances, this place could be dangerous. While we didn't run into any trouble, we did notice that everything seemed indifferent to the fact that they just appeared out of nowhere. Most of them ignored us completely, although a few gave us strange looks. "Some of these people look familiar," I said, looking over at Thomas, and he nodded. "Yeah, I know what you mean, Sam. I recognized a couple people in the diner too. It's weird. It's weird." Those words echoed in my head as I watched a man carrying a bucket walk down the sidewalk. "It's weird," I repeated silently to myself. My eyes followed his movements. The man carried himself with confidence and purpose, but he never looked up at where he was walking. Instead, he stared straight ahead and continued forward without looking back once. He disappeared around the corner of a building, and I noticed another person staring directly at me. He was tall and thin, wearing a black hiking jacket. His face was pale and he was bald. He was standing in the doorway of a small coffee shop. He reminded me of the missing hiker that we had searched for last week. That's when I realized why I recognized some of the people here. They are all people who have vanished from national parks. That's how we found out that almost every single person in Hungry Horse had been reported missing from national parks. We spoke to everyone we could find. Some refused to talk, others were friendly enough, but none of them knew anything about why they were there. As far as they were concerned, they lived in Hungry Horse, Montana. They weren't sure exactly when they had arrived there. A lot of them couldn't remember much before arriving in Hungry Horse. They also told us that they had been here for years. Many of them had been born and raised in the town and believed it was the real deal. They all knew the townsfolk by name and went to school with them. One woman, an older lady named Irene, told us that she had no idea that she had been reported missing. She worked at the local hardware store and had been living in Hungry Horse for more than 45 years. "What about your husband?" I asked. "Do you have children, grandchildren?" She shook her head. "No, I've never married." "How do you feel about being here? Do you miss anywhere else? Your family, maybe?" Again, she shook her head. "Not really. This is my home." As far as she knew, this was the only home she had ever known. I tried to ask if she missed her family, but she only smiled and told me that her family was right here in Hungry Horse, Montana. We thanked her and left the hardware store, hopping back into our Park Ranger truck, and we drove deeper into the town. "I really don't like this, Sammy," Thomas said. I've had a feeling of being watched ever since we entered town. I looked over at him. He was staring at a man standing by a large semi-trailer outside of the diner. The man was holding a jug of milk. I couldn't help but think of the hiker that we had found dead last week. Sam, are you listening to me? I snapped back to reality and I looked at my partner. Thomas started quivering in fear. Sorry, what'd you say? I said that I think we should leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I looked around the town. There were so many people here, so many people who shouldn't be here. All of them were perfectly normal. Some of them even knew each other. How could there be so many people in a town that doesn't exist? I agree. Let's go, I said. We drove away from the town and back to the ranger cabin. Thomas was still shaking. I'm going to call this in, he said. This whole thing is nuts, but we better document it anyway. I mean, how could an entire town full of missing people just appear in the middle of Yellowstone? I nodded. Okay, I'll be in the cabin. I think I need some time to process all this. I sat down on the couch and I closed my eyes. It all felt unreal. I kept thinking about the hiker that we had found out in the woods last week. He had died while out on a hike in the wilderness. He had been alone and confused. But I just saw him alive and well, in a town that doesn't exist. I opened my eyes and looked around. I took in a deep breath and I let it out. It smelled like wood smoke and pine. I stood up and I started pacing the room. What am I supposed to make of all this? I asked myself. Is it some kind of sick joke? Did the government put a town in Yellowstone for some reason? What if it's not a town? Maybe it's a cover-up for something worse. I thought before zoning out. There was a knock on the door. It startled me out of my daydream. Come in, I yelled. Two men came inside, both dressed in black suits. Are you the one in charge here? One of them asked. I looked at him and nodded. The guy was wearing a badge on his chest and a gun on his hip. He looked like an FBI agent. I'm about to go and talk to them, and I don't know if they'll believe me. What do I do? First off, let me clarify some things from my earlier update. I was a wildland firefighter up until a year ago when I decided that I needed a change of pace. And they weren't FBI agents. They said they were from a private company that deals with the otherworldly. I sat in front of the two men, waiting for them to start asking questions. So, do you know why I've been assigned to this case? The taller of the two said. You're the only one in the park who knows anything about this. I nodded. Thomas also knows, but I think you guys already know that. It's pretty weird. The town you described doesn't exist. Not according to the GPS and the satellite data. Yes, it does, I answered, surprised. It's a lie, the second man said. He had short blonde hair and wore glasses. We checked every single point on the map, every house, every business. There is nothing there. No way. You can't tell me you've been everywhere in the park and haven't noticed it, I said angrily. When I first came to the park, I saw the sign for Hungry Horse. I thought that it was a joke at first, but then I saw the motel, the gas station, the diner, the hardware store, and I saw the people inside of them. The man with the glasses nodded slowly. But we've checked every inch of the surrounding area. We've looked at aerial photos, satellite images. We've even flown over the valley with a helicopter. Well, maybe you should have a look again. Maybe you missed something, I said defiantly. We did. There's nothing there. It's not possible. Do I have to show you where it is myself then? I asked. Both men traded glances, and then the shorter one nodded. Very well. If you're so sure you've seen something unusual, we'll take you there. Thank you, I said. I got out of my chair and followed the two men out of the cabin. They were in their early 50s, both with short hair and blue eyes. They were talking quietly to each other as I followed them out of the cabin to their unmarked car. "Now," the man with the glasses said, "if you could just lead us to your town." "Sure," I replied. We drove deeper into the park. Our vehicle was equipped with a topographical GPS system, which made it easy to navigate through the rugged terrain. After an hour of driving, we came to a hill overlooking a wide valley. We passed the sign for Hungry Horse. "Did you see the sign?" I yelled. The men just looked at each other. "I'm sorry, what?" the shorter one asked. "There's a sign here, it says Hungry Horse, right?" The man shook his head. "I don't see anything." He pulled off the road and stopped right before the sign. He turned off the engine and looked at me. "Maybe we should get out and look again," he suggested. I agreed and got out of the car and ran over to the sign. "It's right here," I shouted. He walked up behind me and looked over my shoulder. "What the heck is this?" "It's a sign, it says Hungry Horse," I yelled. He looked at me and glared. I grabbed his arm and pulled him over to where I could see the sign. "Can't you read?" He pulled away and rolled his eyes. "Read what?" "It says Hungry Horse," I yelled. "What are you talking about?" he yelled back. I pointed at the sign. "Look, the name of the town." The man sighed. "There's no sign there." I got angry and was about to yell at the agent when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walking towards us from out of the woods in the direction of the town. It was Irene, the older woman from the hardware store. My eyes lit up and I pointed at her. "Irene!" I yelled excitedly. The agent turned to face the old woman. His eyes widened in surprise and he opened his mouth to say something. But before he could, Irene hit him and sent him flying into a tree. "Oh, you shouldn't have come back, Ranger," she hissed. With lightning speed, she charged the agent with the glasses. "Run!" I yelled and jumped into the car. But it was too late for the agent. Irene had already snapped his neck. I frantically ran back to the unmarked car and tried to start it. The engine sputtered and failed to turn over. Irene stood directly in front of me, blocking my path back to the cabin. "What the heck are you?" I yelled. "You should have never come here," she said. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "What the heck is going on?" I yelled. She snarled and lunged forward. Her teeth had grown sharp and she had snapped at me, but I evaded her bite and rammed my fist into her stomach. "Dang it," I yelled. I grabbed her shoulders and threw her into the side of the car. She slid across the hood and fell to the ground. I jumped around the car and I kicked her once in the ribs. "I'm gonna kill you," I said. She smiled. "Oh, I've been dead for years, honey." I was about to punch her again when a hand grabbed my arm and yanked me backwards. I spun around and stared at the person who grabbed my arm. It was Thomas, my partner. He had followed the agents and I. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "Don't be stupid. We have to get back to the cabin." I looked at him and shook my head. "No, we can't run from these things," I said, flabbergasted. "What the heck is wrong with you?" He slapped me hard across the face. "Shut up. Just shut up." I rubbed my cheek and looked at Thomas in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" His eyes were wide open with panic. I heard Irene starting to get up. "You have to leave now. Right now." He grabbed me by the collar and pushed me into the driver's seat of the dead agent's car. "Get in," he yelled, "and drive." "What about you?" I asked. "I can't fight them anymore. You know how many Rangers they've taken," he said. "Just get out of here." "We just found out about the town yesterday. How do you know all of this?" I yelled. "You just found out about the town," he replied. "The heck does that mean?" "Just go. I'll keep Irene occupied. Get back to the cabin and read my journal." "I can't believe it," he nodded. "I know." I pulled a 180 and sped back down the road towards the cabin. I saw Thomas jump at Irene in the rearview mirror, He looked bigger than he usually does. He was standing on top of her, pinning her arms to the ground. "Screw you," Irene yelled. Thomas punched her in the face and she went limp. "Stay down." The last thing I saw was Thomas running towards the town. I'm back at the cabin and I'm reading through his journal. There's so much that I never knew about him. I finished reading Thomas's journal. I can't believe that I trusted him. Thomas knew everything. He knew what the town was all along. He knew that Irene would come after me, and he didn't tell me anything. I feel like such an idiot. Every single national park has one of these towns. He had been the head of a team of people called the Watchers, a branch of a company called ARC, or Anomaly Research Corporation, assigned to monitor hungry horse, to make sure that the people who go missing in national parks are found before the town can get to them. Jesus Christ, why didn't I figure this out sooner? Why did I trust him? Stupid Sam. I read some more of his journal. It explains that the towns might be sentient and can choose who can see and interact with them, and how national parks are only founded when one of these towns blink into existence. Yellowstone is the first and has the largest town, but the towns aren't the main threat. It's what the people who get taken turn into. When they get taken, their minds are changed and become something else, something sinister. I flipped to another page and it explains that the town doesn't take everyone. Some people are harder for the town to influence and they can resist its power. These people are called Watchers. Watchers can still be taken, but it's rare. And I think Hungry Horse just took the last Watcher in Yellowstone. There's a phone number and a note written inside the front cover of the journal. It says to call the number if Thomas is missing, or if he seems off, and to tell the person who picks up on the other end that Thomas has been compromised. This is insane, I thought to myself. I set the journal aside and I looked out the window. The sun was setting and it cast a beautiful orange glow over the mountains. I could hear the river flowing nearby. I heard a noise outside and I turned around. A large shadow moved quickly across the trees near the cabin. I watched as it approached the edge of the woods. It was Thomas. He didn't look injured at all despite the fight with Irene. I ran to the door and locked it as soon as he had stepped onto the porch. I looked out the window at Thomas. "Why aren't you injured?" I asked through the window. "They can't hurt me anymore," he answered. "Who are they?" I asked. "The town," he whispered. "The town?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "What happened to your team?" "He's dead. He's gone." "Is that why you never told me about the town in the first place?" I asked. "Well, I didn't want to scare you." "How'd you know Irene would come after me?" "Well, the town let me know." "The town? You know what I mean." "The town tells you stuff because you're a watcher." "Yes," he whispered. "What the heck?" "It's not important. Your journal didn't say the town was intelligent. It's alive. It thinks and it feels. It's a living entity. Its mind is vast and powerful. It talks to you. Yeah, sometimes. What does it say?" "Everything. Everything." I was dumbstruck. "That's impossible." "It's true. Now please, let me inside," he loudly begged, but I noticed something was off with his voice. "Why do you sound different?" I asked. "Well, because you're making me nervous." "Well, you're freaking me out." "Please, let me in." I looked up at him for a few minutes without saying anything. There was something off about his face that made me curious, something that seemed odd. Finally, I shook my head. "I'm sorry, Thomas," I said. He threw his body at the door. "Let me in," he shouted. "Well, I can't do that, Thomas," I said calmly. I unlocked the gun locker and grabbed the only shotgun that we had. I pointed it at him and waited. Thomas stopped moving and leaned against the door. His breathing became shallow and quick. "Sammy, you're my best friend," he started to say. "I'm sorry, Thomas, but I can't open the door," I snarled. "Stop lying," he yelled. "Open the freaking door." He started throwing himself against it again. Panicking, I pushed the table and couch in front of it. "Samuel," he screamed, "open this door." I just ignored him and went upstairs and laid on the bed. He kept banging on the door for about an hour. Eventually, he finally stopped, but I could still hear him yelling outside. I think that I might just call that number he wrote down in his journal. Maybe Ark will send someone to deal with Thomas. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a man picked it up and said, "Hello, Thomas." I sat there silently. "Hello?" he asked again. "It got Thomas," I yelled. "Are you safe?" the man asked. "No, I'm not safe," I screamed. "Thomas has become one of the things from Hungry Horse, and now he's here, and he's trying to break into the cabin." "Hold on," he said. "We'll send someone out right away. Is anyone else with you?" "No, just me," I answered. "Okay, stay put and don't let him get inside the cabin," he said, and then he hung up. I laid back down on the bed and tried to ignore the sounds coming from downstairs. I could hear Thomas pounding against the door again. I was terrified that Ark wouldn't show up soon enough. And then suddenly, I heard a car pull up outside. I jumped off the bed and rushed downstairs and looked out the window. There were men with rifles standing outside. I saw one of them run to the cabin. The banging at the door had stopped. Thomas had noticed them. I heard Thomas roar and the sound of gunshots. I watched as the men loaded Thomas, who was still alive somehow, into the back of the van. The 2 men got into the van and drove off as another car pulled up to the cabin. A man in a white lab coat stepped out and walked up to the door, knocking on it. "Open the door, Sam, and don't make this harder than it has to be." "Who the heck are you?" "My name is Dr. Jaden Oxblood," he said. "Well, what do you want?" I demanded. "I need to talk to you about Thomas." "I don't have time for this, just leave me alone," I yelled at him. I heard him sigh, and that's when I felt an arm grab my shoulder and something prick my neck. I started to curse and the world faded to black. I woke up on the couch about 30 minutes later. Looking around, I saw that Dr. Oxblood was sitting in a chair across from me. "Now that everything has calmed down, you're going to tell me everything you know," he said. "I guess I don't have a choice, guys. I'll update you all after I talk with the doctor." Let me explain what happened. Oxblood drove me to the headquarters of Ark, and once there, Dr. Oxblood led me into his office and told me to sit down. He locked the door and sat across from me. The room was filled with bookshelves and pictures of presidents and generals from many different wars. On the walls were weapons that I didn't even recognize. "So, tell me about the town," he said. "What makes you think I know anything about the town?" I asked. "Well, I have reason to believe that you are aware of its existence," he said. "Oh, fine, what do you want to know?" "Tell me everything you know about the town." "Everything?" "All of it." I told him about the day that Thomas told me about the town, our trip to Hungry Horse, and how Thomas had stayed behind to fight Irene. He listened intently as I spoke. He was taking notes while I talked, and occasionally he asked me a question. When I finished telling him everything that he wanted to know, he stood up and walked over to a cabinet and he opened it. He reached inside and pulled out a small silver box and placed it on his desk. "What's that?" I asked. "It's a key," he answered. "One day, you'll need it." "Why would I ever need a key?" I asked. "You'll find out," he said. "If you really want to find out what happened to your friend and figure out what the town is, you'll use the key to unlock the secrets of the town." "Why should I trust you?" I asked. "I can't tell you that. You'll have to learn to trust me in time." He handed me the key. It was heavier than I expected it to be. I looked at it for a long moment before putting it into my pocket. "What do you plan on doing with me?" I asked. "You're a very valuable asset to us. We want you to become the newest watcher of Yellowstone." I stared at him for a second, remembering what I had read in Thomas's journal. "What is a watcher exactly?" "Well, it's a title given to humans who have been chosen by ARK to help protect the world from the supernatural," he said. "Well, doesn't ARK already have watchers?" I asked. "Yes, they have many watchers, but none of them have ever entered one of the towns without changing, like you. You're the first human to enter one of the towns and return without becoming a monster," he answered. I sat there and thought about it. "So if I agree to become a watcher, what are the risks for me?" I asked. "Well, there are no guarantees. The risk of your life, your sanity, and possibly losing your humanity are all very high." "And what happens if I decline?" I asked. "We will kill you," he answered. I laughed. "Why do you think I'll accept?" I asked, and he smiled. "Because you want to save your best friend Thomas and you want more answers." "Are you saying that you can give me those answers?" I asked. "Not yet, but once you become a watcher, I'll be able to teach you everything you need to know." "Well, how long until I can become a watcher?" I asked, and he smiled. "You've been a watcher ever since you read that journal." I stared at him for a minute before shaking my head. "You can't be serious," I exclaimed. "Completely serious." I sighed. "Alright, so what exactly do you expect me to do? I don't know any more about the towns than you do." "I know that much." "So why did you ask me here then?" "Well, to offer you a job." "A job?" "Yeah, a job as a watcher. I want you to become one of us." "Well, what kind of job exactly?" I asked. "In order to become an official watcher, you must become a member of ARK," he answered. "What does that entail?" I asked. "You will have to sign an agreement stating that you will work for us. You will also be required to undergo training and take a test to prove yourself," he explained. "Well, and what do I get in return for signing this agreement?" I asked. "A bigger paycheck than you've ever seen," he answered. "Seriously?" "Yeah, the pay's pretty good," he said. "But the real benefit is the knowledge that you're helping to keep the world safe from monsters, demons, and other threats to humanity. Not everyone gets that chance." "Yeah, it sounds good to me," I said. "Well, good," he said. "Congratulations." He unlocked the door with the key and we left the room together. On the way out, a man dressed in a park ranger uniform approached me. "This will be your new partner," Dr. Oxblood said. "Welcome to ARK," he said. "Do you mind if I asked your name?" I asked. "My name is John," he answered, and I shook his hand. "Well, nice to meet you, John." "Likewise." "Alright, well, I guess this is goodbye for now, Oxblood. I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon," I said. "You better hope you do," he joked. After leaving the building, John and I got in his car and drove off. "So where are we going?" I asked. "Well, back to your cabin," he answered. We arrived at my cabin and the sun was setting and the sky was getting dark. We got out of the car and headed towards the cabin. Once inside, I sat on the couch and I looked at John. "So what's going to happen now?" I asked. "Well, that depends entirely on you." "What do you mean by that?" I asked. John took out a bottle of whiskey and poured himself a drink. I watched as he drank most of it before answering. "I intend to train you to become a watcher, but until then, you'll be living with me," he said. "Living with you?" I asked. "For the next couple of months. I'll help you get used to being a watcher so that when it comes time to choose your own partner, you'll be able to keep them safe. You'll also start to learn things about ARK that even some of our agents don't know." "Well, what kind of things?" "I can't really explain it to you. It will only make sense once you're fully trained." I nodded. "Fine." "Drink up," he said. "We need to get you settled in." I laughed and poured myself some whiskey. John says that training begins in an hour. I'm going to take a nap before he trains me. I was awoken from my nap by the sound of shattering glass and John yelling for me to get my butt downstairs. I ran down and into the kitchen. What was that? It wasn't John who answered my question. Hello, Samuel. It seems I've gotten the upper hand this time, Irene said, holding John by the shoulders. She looked much younger than when I last saw her, and she was wearing a black dress, white gloves, and her hair was done up. She was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. What did you do to Thomas? I asked. Oh, Thomas was a fool, Samuel. He chose to stay behind to protect you. He made his choice and my town changed him, she said. I would have killed you both if you hadn't escaped. But now you're mine again and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. What are you talking about? What do you mean your town? I asked. Irene smirked, her eyes sparkling with hatred. My town is a demon. The town is a creature created by the demon king, Azazel. He built our town to serve as his prison. He puts all the monsters in it so they could one day be released upon your world. I was speechless. My mind was reeling from the news. Who are you? I finally managed to say. I'm the gatekeeper of the demon kingdom. I'm here to destroy the world and end life as we know it, she said. Let me go, John shouted. She slammed him against the wall and held him there with ease. You're not going anywhere until I decide otherwise, she said, smiling. Release him, I yelled. She looked at me and laughed. You don't seem to understand, Samuel. I control this place. Nobody is going to help you. She let go of John and walked towards me. You don't scare me, and I know you can't hurt me, she said. And that's when I remembered the silver key that Dr. Oxblood had given me. Where did you get that? She snarled. Wouldn't you like to know? I quipped back at her. I suddenly felt something strange. It was like my body was being pulled away from my soul. I struggled to hold on to it. What are you doing? She screeched. I tried to resist, but it was too late. My soul was gone. Give me the key, Irene screamed, running towards me. Suddenly, I was back in my body again. I was kneeling on the floor in front of Irene, holding onto my head with one hand and clutching my chest with the other. I could see everything in slow motion. I watched as Irene charged towards me, her face twisted with rage. I stood up and grabbed her by the neck, squeezing tightly. Let go of me, she screeched. I squeezed harder. I felt her throat bulge and blood began to leak out of her mouth. I threw her through the window that she had broken in through. I watched as she got up and glared at me before turning around and heading back towards a hungry horse. I turned around, looking over to John, who was standing in the doorway, a deep gash running down the left side of his face. He smiled at me. You might not need as much training as I thought you would, he said. That was pretty impressive. I felt a surge of pride. I'll be right back, I said. Be careful, Samuel, he said. Don't go get yourself killed. I smiled. I wouldn't dream of it. I followed Irene back to her house in Hungry Horse. I was hoping to kill her, but right as I was about to enter through a window in the basement, I heard her say, Are you idiots ready yet? We just need 5 more humans and I'll be powerful enough to open another gate. I want to open the next one in Canada. I backed away, looking in through a window on the bottom floor, and I saw about 20 townspeople gathered inside. That's when I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, dialing John's number as I crossed Hungry Horse's border back into Yellowstone. John answered his phone almost immediately. Where are you? He asked. I ignored his question and asked one of my own instead. Are there any people camping in Yellowstone tonight? I asked. I'm not sure why. Irene only needs to take 5 more people before she can create another town, and she's got a group together to go out and find some, I said. He swore under his breath. How big is the group? About 20. Alright, listen, I have a plan. We need to stop her before she can take more people. Are there any people camping close to Hungry Horse? I questioned him. Yeah, there's a bunch camping around Old Faithful, he said. How far away are we from them? I asked. Well, I don't know exactly. It's hard to tell how far away anything is in Montana at night, but they should be within half an hour or less, he answered. Alright, listen, I have a plan. Can you get to the campground before midnight? Yeah, I can be there in 30 minutes, he answered. Good. Get your gear together and meet me at Glacier. Don't forget to bring your guns, I ordered. Roger that, I'll see you there, he said. I hung up the phone and stared at it for several seconds before dialing Oxblood's number. Samuel, I cut him off. No time. I need you to send a team out to the campground at Glacier, I told him. Well, alright, I'll have a team heading out there as soon as possible, he answered. I hung up the phone as it began to run faster than any human has ever run before. I thought about Irene and how close she was to opening another gate. I was filled with rage at knowing that I might die trying to stop her, but I couldn't think about that right now. I needed to focus on what I was doing. If Irene opened up another gate, who knows what will happen? The moon was slowly rising into the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. The air was cold and the temperature was dropping as I ran. I could hear the sounds of the wolves chasing their prey somewhere nearby. As I ran towards the campground near Glacier, I could smell smoke emanating from the campground. I shivered at the familiar scent and I continued to run. As I got closer to Glacier, I noticed the campground was packed full of tents and RVs. I started hearing gunshots and screams. I looked around frantically for ARC operatives, but it didn't appear that they were here yet. There was a large burning fire in the middle of the campground. It looked like somebody had set it. I kept running, weaving between the tents until I found a tent that was completely shredded on one side and engulfed in flames. There was a body inside and it was completely mangled. I could barely make out any details of the person's face. There was no way to tell much of anything from what was left of it. But whoever this person was, they definitely weren't a friend of Irene's. I looked around the campground again and saw nothing but chaos. People were screaming, crying, and running away from Irene's monsters as John fought them off. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a helicopter. I looked up at the night sky and saw an ARC helicopter swooping in. It hovered over the middle of the campground, their lights shining brightly. "ARC, come on, hurry," I yelled. I was still a few hundred feet away from the fight when I saw one of those things jump onto the roof of an RV and launch itself at the helicopter. It smashed through the window and tore the pilot out of her seat. I watched helplessly as the helicopter careened out of control, crashing into the last section of the campground that wasn't blocked by Irene's people. The helicopter exploded, sending debris everywhere and causing panic amongst the remaining campers. I took off running, making my way towards the center of the campground, where John and his men were fighting the creatures. He kept them at bay, but they were slowly overwhelming him. That's when Irene grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground, her face inches from his, her long red nails glistening in the moonlight. "What do you think you're doing?" she growled. John struggled to speak. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" he wheezed. She leaned in closer and brought her lips to John's ear. "What do I want?" she whispered and then pushed him back, sending him flying into the dirt. "I want your world," she yelled. She pointed at John and the campers. "And nothing you can do will stop me," she roared with laughter. She stepped forward and placed her foot on John's neck. "Now you're going to watch as my people slaughter every single person that you were trying to protect." My vision went red and I let out the loudest, most visceral roar that I'd ever heard. The fighting instantly stopped as everyone winced and covered their ears. Everyone but Irene, that is. Irene turned and snarled at me. "Hey," I sneered at her. I stood in front of her, my hands balled into fists at my sides. I looked into Irene's eyes as she glared back at me with pure hatred in her own. Do you really think that you'll stand a chance against me? I'm the strongest being that you will ever have to face. You're nothing compared to what I can do, she yelled, her voice filled with venom. Watch me, I responded. I took several steps back and leaned forward, letting the muscles in my legs tense up. My shoulders tightened and I could feel my back arch. I let out another primal roar as I prepared to pounce. Irene smirked, her eyes sparkling in the light of the burning fires. Go ahead, you'll never touch me, Watcher, she taunted. You're far too. I didn't give her the time to finish. I sprang forward, slamming into Irene and knocking us both to the ground. I felt her claws rip through my jacket as we fell, but I didn't care. I wanted to tear her apart. We rolled over and over, punching and clawing at each other. I tried to use my enhanced strength to pin her down, but she was too quick and dexterous. I managed to hit her in the stomach, but she simply grabbed my arm and threw me across the campground. I slammed into the side of an RV, which sent it rolling. The impact knocked all the wind out of me and left me stunned for a moment. I lay there in pain, unable to move, while Irene walked over to me. You should have stayed in your cabin, you pathetic little Watcher, she screamed. I rolled onto my back and wiped the blood from my mouth as I watched her approach. I'm going to enjoy ripping you apart, she said. Not if I can help it, I growled. I rose to my knees and let out a defiant roar. I'm going to end you, Irene, I said. She laughed. Do you know how many Watchers before you thought that same thing? She taunted. Well, maybe I'll be the first to actually do it, I said. It won't be the last. I've been killing Watchers since before you were born, and I'll continue to kill them until my power is absolute, she said. Not today, I promised. I didn't have to wait very long to test my words. Irene charged at me, and with one fluid motion, I grabbed her by the neck and flung her to my right. She smashed into the picnic table. The force of the impact had knocked the entire thing over, spilling food and drinks everywhere. Irene let out a scream of anger and frustration as she scrambled to her feet. She picked up the picnic table and threw it at me. I used my enhanced strength to leap out of the way, but the table splintered and cracked against the side of an RV. I turned to see Irene charging at me once again. I sidestepped her attack and punched her in the stomach. She grunted and doubled over, falling to her knees. I kicked her in the face, sending her crashing backward. Irene got to her feet and charged at me once more, swinging the broken remains of the picnic table around like a weapon. I ducked under it and kicked her in the chest, slamming her back into a tree. She fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Irene struggled to get to her feet. You won't kill me. You'll never be able to kill me, she said. I could tell that she was really starting to doubt that. You're wrong, and we both know I can, I said. Irene finally was able to stand back up. She brought the broken remains of the picnic table around like a shield. Well, come on then, Watcher. Let's finish this. I lunged forward, my hands outstretched. I slammed them into the wooden railing of the picnic table, shattering it and knocking Irene to the ground. I grabbed her by the throat and lifted her up off the ground. You will pay for everything you've done, every life you've took, I growled. You'll never kill us all, she spat in my face. More of you humans join us every day. She began laughing. I gripped her head and twisted hard. Her neck snapped like a twig, and the red light faded from her eyes. I turned to look at the chaos that was taking place in the campground behind me. I let out a primal, earth-shaking roar, and I tore into the last of Irene's group. My rage was so powerful that the ground shook and trees toppled over. The sound of metal screaming in protest echoed throughout the night as I fought. It was beautiful. I lost track of time as I killed each and every one of them, leaving no survivors. They had made their choice and now they would suffer the consequences. The carnage was horrible, and I hadn't even reached Hungry Horse yet. I tore the last of the group apart as I reached the town, and as I did, the sun finally started to rise, and the residents of Irene's town were already up and about. They were in for a surprise. I started at the diner, tearing the door off the hinges and slaughtering every last resident inside. I stormed through town, destroying anything that got in my way, and I moved quickly and efficiently, tearing through a row of houses, smashing through walls, and breaking furniture. The citizens were panicked. They were running everywhere trying to escape, only to find themselves trapped in the middle of my rampage. I heard the screams and cries of terror as I destroyed the town, and soon it was done. I had slaughtered everyone who had lived there, and I was left standing in the center of a pile of dead residents. It was over. Irene had failed. The people of her town were gone. I grinned and called Dr. Axblood. He would definitely enjoy hearing about this. Good job, Samuel. I heard it was quite the show. I wish I had been there to witness it, Axblood said. It was incredible. I don't think that I'll ever forget it, I replied. Excellent work. Your work here is done. Go home and take some time to rest and recover. There will be more blood to spill soon enough. These towns aren't the only weird things about national parks, Axblood said. Understood. I'll contact you when I need you again, Axblood had added. I hung up the phone and I closed my eyes. What was next? I couldn't wait to find out. But for now, it was good to know that Yellowstone was in safe hands. Here on Creepscast, we love talking about the people that we adore, and when it comes to getting great sleep, we really love the folks at Ghostbed. As a family-owned company with over 20 years of experience, Ghostbed knows a thing or two about crafting the perfect mattress. They use only the most durable, supportive, and long-lasting materials so you can trust that your bed will provide you with years of excellent sleep. What sets Ghostbed apart is their signature and patented cooling technology. Say goodbye to those restless, sweaty nights. Every mattress keeps you cool and comfortable so that you can sleep like a dream. When you purchase a Ghostbed mattress, your comfort is guaranteed. With their 101 night sleep trial, you can try it out risk-free and experience the difference for yourself. Plus, they offer free shipping and most items ship within 24 hours. Visit ghostbed.com/MrCreeps to save 50% off site-wide. Ghostbed offers high-quality mattresses at a fantastic price. Their #1 seller is the Ghostbed Luxe, designed with premium memory foam and cutting-edge cooling technology that reacts and adjusts to your body heat as you sleep. Or if you prefer more of a hybrid feel with both foam and coils, check out the Ghostbed Flex Hybrid for the perfect blend of comfort and support. And if you need any assistance along the way, Ghostbed has a team of dedicated sleep experts ready to help you find the perfect mattress. They'll guide you through the options and ensure you make the best choice for your needs. Ready for a more comfortable night of sleep? Then visit ghostbed.com/MrCreeps. And because we're all sharing the love here on Creepscast, use the code MrCreeps to save 50% off your purchase site-wide. That's right, 50%. I work as a ranger in one of the most haunted parks in America. When I graduated high school, I had few options. No money for college and no trades or skills, but the national forest nearby was desperate for park rangers and willing to hire immediately. Little did I know what I was getting into when I had accepted the job. This all occurred a few years ago, and it made me seriously reconsider my line of work. The first week I was there, I came across a cabin that was not on any map. It nearly blended in with the pines and oaks around it, being made of logs stacked on each other with no windows and only a single door. I circled around it, disturbed by what appeared to be drops of blood emanating out from the door in a fan-like pattern. But I disregarded it, assuming that it must be some hunter's cabin and that the blood was likely from a deer. I opened the door and to my horror found the blood was not from a deer at all. There were multiple human corpses hanging from the ceiling, some cut down the middle with their guts taken out as if done by a hunter prepping a buck. The floor was covered in what appeared to be skin, stretched out into a macabre carpet in front of the fireplace. On the table were cups made from human skulls, and the smell was so overwhelmingly rotten that I immediately turned to the side and vomited up my late lunch. As I composed myself and looked back inside, I realized with growing horror that the madman who had done all this was sitting in a chair with a shotgun in his mouth. His eyes followed me as I sprinted away, and I heard the gun go off a couple of seconds later. I hid behind a tree 100 feet or so from the cabin, shakily raising my walkie-talkie to my trembling lips. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking badly. "I need immediate backup on the deer trail behind the graffiti rock on Windermere Lake. We have multiple fatalities by homicide. I repeat, multiple fatalities, and I believe we may also have a suicide. We need police in the area as soon as possible." A voice came in over the radio. "Get out of there, Ranger," hissed a deep, guttural voice. "Get out of there and never come back. That cabin is for the sinners, those who worship the dead stars and those who have offered their lives to the Ancient Ones." The walkie-talkie then stopped working and turned into pure static, but I heard the same voice approaching from behind me. I frantically reached into my pocket for my bear mace and folding knife. The bear mace seemed like such a pitiful tool, as I held it in my hand and heard somebody drawing closer, dragging their legs through the twigs and leaves on the autumn forest floor. Now I heard the same voice, but instead of coming through my walkie-talkie, it was coming from directly in front of me. "You are not one who sees the lights from the dying stars, or one who would trade your life for the knowledge of that light. So run while you still have the chance." Behind the tree, I saw the man who had killed himself approaching. The entire top of his head was gone, though his jaw and lips were still intact. Red poured from out of his nose and covered his eyes like red tears. It was impossible that he could still be alive, less likely walking and talking like he was. But he stood there 10 feet away in his camel jacket and khakis, looking paler than a bug writhing in the sunlight. As I watched him, shaking with horror and unintentionally dropping my walkie-talkie, he fell to the forest floor and ceased moving, turning back into a regular faceless corpse. My walkie-talkie started working normally again, and I immediately called the crime scene into the ranger station. They had SWAT and helicopters on the way within minutes, and I vacated the premises as fast as possible. And that was just my first week. Things got a lot weirder after that. His name was Ron Gutierrez. The head ranger, Antonio Brown, told me later in his office. A multiple felon, convicted offender. Disappeared from parole a couple of months ago. I think the feds put out a warrant for him. Interstate evasion or something, but it didn't do any good. He was never suspected of murder, at least as far as these state troopers seemed to think. But clearly our old buddy Ron was up to a lot more than the police thought. There were parts of at least 4 bodies in that cabin you found. He shook his head in disgust, his large mustache and huge belly making him look like an agitated walrus as he did so. This is going to be a mess in the media, I can tell you that right now. I seriously doubt 4 is the final number of his victim tally. That means that the FBI will be arriving too. As is usual protocol with serial killer investigations, they're going to want to see if there were more victims from other states. I just want to go home. I said, and it was true. I hadn't slept the night before and I kept seeing the dead man's face, hovering before me in the dark. And I wondered about that voice, that horrible voice. Was it a delusion or stress? It had to be. "Listen, Cal," the head ranger said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "I feel for you, I really do. But we're understaffed, as you know. I can give you the rest of today off, but I'll need you back tomorrow. Don't let stuff like this ride with you. Just forget it. Go have a beer or shoot some guns or whatever you do to blow off steam. But don't let that madman ruin your life too. He's already ruined enough others." "You're right, thanks, Antonio," I said, forming a feeble smile. My stomach hurt and my heart was racing, and I just wanted to go home and lay down. I had no idea at the time, but things were about to get much, much worse. I went home and turned off the lights and laid down in the dark. The sun was still out, but I had the thick curtains closed. My wife came home from work a couple of hours later and found me staring at the ceiling. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded. "If I started going crazy," I asked her, "would you want to know?" She smiled, amused. "Yeah, sure," she said. "I'm hoping that I'd be the first person you would tell. Why? Is there something you want to tell me?" "Nope," I said, laughing a little. She always cheered me up. I fell asleep soon after and awoke to a ringing telephone in the dark room by myself. "Hello?" I said, rising. "Cal, this is Antonio," he said. "The police are on their way. Now listen, I'm here with the FBI and they have found evidence. Well, they think our good old buddy Ron had an accomplice. Maybe more than one, I don't know. Are you okay?" "Hold on," I said, dropping the phone quickly. I got to my feet, a surge of adrenaline waking me fully as his words sunk into my consciousness. "Stacy?" I cried, moving from room to room. I got no reply. "Are you here? Please answer me, now." The house stayed as silent as a corpse. As I got downstairs, I found the front door wide open, the light from the street lamps flooding inside. But my wife was nowhere to be found. She was gone. I ran out the door as sirens and flashing lights covered the streets. Police swarmed the area with their guns drawn, telling me to put my hands up and to walk forward slowly. They found no trace of the kidnappers or of my wife. Soon, Antonio showed up with 2 FBI agents standing to his side. They saw me sitting there on the curb, my head hung low, my eyes wet. The agents gave away nothing behind their sunglasses, both in black suits with clean-shaven faces and short hair. The sheriff showed up and pulled them to the side. I saw him pointing at the house and talking faster and faster, his eyes a mixture of uncertainty and fear. Clouds the color of nicotine stains passed slowly overhead, and I felt my energy draining, my mind running slow. I knew that I might never see my wife alive again. I might never see her dead for that matter. The woods in the area seemed endless and vast, and many people simply disappeared, never to be found. Their bodies likely lay at the bottom of lakes or deep down in the dirt of national parks, far off the trails where the eyes of tourists wouldn't roam. "So, what do you know?" I asked them, raising my head as they approached. I dried my eyes, blinking fast, steeling myself and trying to raise my will. "Well," Antonio said, "we found multiple sets of fingerprints in the cabin. Only one belonged to the dead suspect and the victims were eliminated, at least those with fingers left. However, when we checked the footage of the park to try to find evidence relating to the crimes, we saw you pulling out and being followed." My heart stopped in my chest. I hadn't known or suspected anything at the time. They might even have somebody watching me right now. But why hadn't they taken me? Why hadn't they just killed me or at least tried to? Why just take my wife? I thought that I might find out sooner than expected. As the situation cooled down and my wife's trail got colder by the minute, I was taken aside by Sheriff Cowles and Antonio Brown. They looked uncomfortable. Antonio massaged his walrus mustache repeatedly, a sign of anxiety that I had seen before. The sheriff looked around the street as if hoping to find my wife just randomly stumbling out of a nearby building, drunk and confused but certainly alive. Sheriff Cowles was a skinny and unassuming man. His body showed signs of lifelong alcoholism. Bursted capillaries ran along the length of his tanned face, and his nose looked like a patchwork of red trails. But in his face, his dark eyes showed intelligence, and on his extremely skinny body, he proudly displayed his badge, the star looking dull and lifeless under the thick, dirty clouds that covered our town. I felt the first drops of rain hit me on top of the head. They felt like tears, as if even the sky had started to cry to join me in my loss. Well, Sheriff Cowles said, trying to form a smile. It failed miserably, and he went back to frowning and looking around at the houses, avoiding eye contact with me. We have some good news, Mr. Lorenzo. I looked at him expectantly. He cleared his throat. First, we have solid fingerprint evidence from the scene. We're almost positive the fingerprints collected nearby are not from any victims. We tried running them through state and federal databases, but he shook his head, sighing. No leads yet. Don't give up hope, though. These things take time. The car that followed you was reported stolen sometime last night. It might be a dead end, but if we can find video footage in the area, we might be able to connect the stolen car to the murders and kidnapping of your wife. We have state and federal police on that right now. Your neighbors didn't report seeing or hearing anything, at least not anyone that we have interviewed yet. We're still going through, but as we get further from the house, it becomes less likely that anyone will have seen much more than a car, if that. Your neighbor across the street, however, has a doorbell camera installed, and we're currently reviewing the evidence. It's only a matter of time before we catch these scumbags, I'll tell you that. They've left far too much evidence behind. It doesn't look like a professional job. That means they'll probably make more mistakes along the way, and we'll find and use every single one to make sure your wife gets returned unharmed. I still didn't look at him, but stared up blankly at the road ahead of me. The rain started falling harder. Antonio went to his car, grabbing an umbrella and standing beside me, shielding him and me from the dirty rain. It's only a matter of time, I said, until they kill my wife too. You realize that. Time is not a factor on our side. As she gets further away and the trail becomes colder, the chance of finding any part of her ever again rapidly drops to zero. You're right, Antonio said, moving his huge body closer to me as lightning and thunder started. Echoing booms spread across the street. Many of the agents and police went to their cars for umbrellas or went inside the house. Any trace evidence on the street or lawn would wash away to nothing after a few minutes. Most likely it already had. Why do you think we're all here? We're doing everything we can to keep the trail hot. Do you have any ideas, Cal? Any ideas at all? Don't be afraid to tell us. Nothing is too outlandish. Heck, I would call up a psychic if I actually thought it might help us find her. I thought maybe we could try using you as bait, Sheriff Cowles said. If they followed you once, perhaps they would do it again. I nodded. That's a good idea. Yeah, it's worth a shot. But I think we need to go back to the park where this all started. That's where we'll find the answers, I said. And as the police work wound its way forward through bureaucracy and uncertainty, we ultimately did go back to the park. Sheriff Cowles stayed at the site for a while, stating that he couldn't leave just yet. I gave him my cell phone number and the number for the ranger station at the park and told him to call me if he had figured anything out. He promised he would, and he shook my hand, the thin bones of his long fingers wrapping around my palm as I stared into his bleary eyes. He didn't stare back but looked away quickly. Though this happened years ago, I still remember how he refused to look me in the face, and to this day I wonder how much he really knew. Certainly in hindsight, it was far more than he let on at that time. Antonio called up a few rangers explaining the situation and asking them if they would help. They readily agreed, and he said that he would pay them overtime for their help. Within half an hour, we had 5 rangers at the station, all armed with shotguns and rifles from the armory. We couldn't exactly close the whole park, which ranged over 200 square miles and included campgrounds and nature reserves, but the area near the cabin had been sealed off and manned by police. Antonio explained the situation as quickly as he could. The other rangers looked at me with eyes of sadness, and some tried to avoid looking at me altogether. I kept seeing my wife in my mind, her smiling face and beautiful green eyes, looking like polished circles of emerald. "We'll break into 2 groups," Antonio said, handing me a 20-gauge shotgun and a backpack. I found water and snacks as well as some boxes of buckshot and shotgun slugs inside. "I'll go with Cal. Dean, you come with us as well." He motioned to a young ranger extremely tall and skinny with strange tattoos of pyramids and eyes, and half animal gods all down his arms. He usually covered them up when at work. "What are we actually expecting to find?" another ranger asked, an older woman named Allie. "Bodies, lunatics. Are we looking for more cabins? The entire thing is somewhat fuzzy, I guess. And where are the police? Shouldn't we have police escorts as well?" "Look, the police did a scan of the area," Antonio said, frowning slightly at her. "We shouldn't find anything dangerous. We're only looking for evidence. Anything dropped, any disturbed trails in the vicinity of the cabin that the police may have missed. Drops of blood, dead animals. I don't really know what we'll find, if anything. I doubt that it'll be dangerous, though." Looking back at it now, a chill runs down my spine when I think about just how wrong he turned out to be. Night had started to come again too soon. We used bright LED flashlights on the trail, speaking little through the misery of the cold rain. All of us had ponchos on, but the wind began to whip up, blowing the rain sideways and into my face and clothes. I swore under my breath. What an absolutely miserable day. Dean stayed close by my side, talking sporadically. He tried to cheer me up, talking about jokes and the news and the stock market. I mostly grunted and nodded, feeling disassociated and unreal, like I was in a dream. But then his conversation took a bizarre turn. "Have you ever seen or heard, heard too, anything really weird in this park?" Dean asked, looking sideways at me. He looked much younger in his uncertainty, like a teenager trying to ask for a dance with a pretty girl, but uncertain how to go about it. I sighed, realizing that he would not leave me alone. Part of me also realized that he had volunteered to come out of here in the middle of the night, solely to help me, and that he may even end up risking his life on this mission if things went sour. But I still felt a childish spitefulness about having to interact. "Yeah, I've heard some weird stuff," I said. "I also saw a carpet made of human skin. I guess that qualifies as weird." "Oh, it does, Dean nodded. "But it's not like supernatural weird. I mean, have you ever seen a ghost or a demon or anything like that?" I paused for a very long moment. Antonio walked in front of us grunting and keeping his gun raised. The illumination from the flashlight attachment, bouncing crazily off the trees and making the shadows of the branches look like arms, stretching out in the woods to grab whatever they could. I looked over at him. His face had a very serious expression on it, unusual for Dean, and he avoided eye contact. "What is this about?" I asked. "Have you seen a ghost here? Is that what you're trying to tell me?" "Well," Dean said, looking away into the trees, shining his flashlight at nothing for good measure. "I'm not sure. I definitely saw something strange during the night shift one time. I thought at the time that maybe it was like, I don't know, a homeless guy on meth who was just really weird and crazy looking. But I was patrolling the trails for poachers and trespassers when somebody just started screaming. I was nearly 5 miles away from the ranger station in the middle of nowhere, and the trail itself was rarely traveled except by hunters. My first thought was that it was a fox or some injured animal. They can sound very human when they scream, you know." I nodded. But it followed me and kept following me as I went down the trail. I turned, trying to see what the heck it was. I called out, identifying myself as a ranger and telling them that they were trespassing. But the trail was closed for the night and the police were on their way. It seemed like the person or whatever they were just kept screaming, as if they didn't need to breathe. I've never heard anything like it. They just didn't stop. It went on for minutes and then suddenly cut out. But ahead of me on the trail, I saw something naked. It kind of looked like a person, but their body was skin and bones and so pale that it almost glowed. I could see every bone and every rib. Its head was down and it just stood there with this eerie smile on their face. No hair anywhere. No eyebrows, no pubic hair, no chest hair. Not even hair on their head. Now I guess they could just shave really very well every day, but your eyebrows? I mean, I don't know, people are strange, I guess. And then it raised its head and I saw the eyes were missing, just cut out of its face. Black sockets seemed to stare at me, as if they could still see me. I don't see how, but blood trickled from the empty sockets and its smile widened. "Oh, Dean," it said to me, "your mother says the water's fine. Come on in, Dean, she's waiting for you." My mother died by drowning in Lake Winnipesaukee when I was 10. Nobody really knows about it because I don't talk about it. She hit her head on the side of the boat and fell out. My dad had been doing donuts in the middle of the lake, trying to make me laugh, and my mom just lost her balance or something, and well, by the time they dragged her body out, she didn't look like my mom anymore. Blue lips and swollen skin, and the fishes had started to nip at her and tear her apart. Now, how could this random guy in the middle of the woods with no eyes have known and be waiting for me? And after he said it, he ran towards me. I immediately reached for my bear mace and then realized that it might not work so well on somebody without eyes. Though I guess if I got it in his mouth and nose, he would still drop. But I turned around and after a few seconds later, I looked back and he was gone. Dean shuddered. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. I checked my back every couple seconds on the way to the station and I called on the walkie-talkie for help. But I just got static and screams back. And I swear that I was totally sober when it happened. I wasn't dreaming or anything and I hadn't even had a beer in over a week. It really happened, Cal. There's something in these woods, something strange and inhuman. I nodded, about to respond when we heard the first skittering of footsteps from behind us. I stopped, motioning to Dean. He whispered something to Antonio, and I saw Antonio's sweaty face glancing back and forth, looking down the trail with wide eyes. And then I heard it again, the snapping of a twig and the slight rustling of brush. "Identify yourselves," I yelled. "We're park rangers and this is a police investigation. You're currently trespassing in a restricted area. This area is closed until the state agency clears it for reopening. If you identify yourselves and leave the area immediately, you won't be in any trouble." I waited and nothing happening at first. And then a soft, low chuckling started from the darkness. My shotgun had a flashlight attachment and I shone the bright LED light in the direction of the laughter. From behind the bushes, I saw the flash of an inhuman hand. The fingers looked crooked and far too long. the skin blackened and covered with weeping sores. And then it withdrew into the brush and more laughter started from all sides of the trail. "You are not home, Rangers," a mocking voice said. "This is our home now. You're trespassing on holy ground. The penalty for that is death." Antonio raised his rifle, screaming at the voice. "Come on and try it," he yelled, his face flushed and his large body quivering with rage and fear. "You maniacs are due for a lesson in what happens to people who mess with rangers." The laughter grew louder and more intense, and figures started to come out of the shadows and bushes, stepping out from behind trees and appearing from the huge rocks standing all over the park. They had the same blackened skin and thin, long limbs. They looked like demons who had just stepped out of down below, and perhaps they were. Without hesitation, I opened fire and they ran forwards, hissing and shrieking, their naked, sickly bodies and fire-blackened skin, approaching closer with every moment. I saw the chest explode on the nearest figure, a tall, emaciated creature with bloody red eyes. The film of blood seemed about to overflow and fall down his face as tears, but it never did. The eyes of the others looked the same, and in the beams of the overly bright LED flashlights, they almost seemed to glow and shimmer. I could see the vague silhouette of pupils beneath the blood. Though this happened years ago, I still remember the way that they looked. The superhuman speed of these abominations, the flakes that fell off their crisp, destroyed skin in the pale moonlight, and the much brighter lights of our flashlight beams. Their scorched bodies moved in a blur, surrounding and rushing us. The gunshots broke the stillness of the woods, and everybody seemed to devolve into chaos within seconds. In the moment, I felt a wave of calmness come over me. I could see us being surrounded, see the rounds taking down the first line of creatures, but I felt at peace. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. I aimed the shotgun again and again at center mass, blowing apart their chest and stomachs with shotgun slugs, and none of them rose. Blue blood spurted from their wounds. It had the hue of a dark Arctic ocean, frozen and endless. The dark blue fluid soaked into their burnt skin as they lay on the ground, gasping and dying, clenching and unclenching their twisted fingers with endless gurgling screams. But we were 5 against many, hopelessly outnumbered. Whatever these things were, they seemed to have no fear. They kept coming, running at us, and I had to reload. With practiced ease, my fingers yanked slugs from my bulging pockets, slamming them into the shotgun. Most of the other rangers had also run out of ammo. I saw a couple dozen blackened bodies laying across the trail and the forest, some of them dead, others dying or seizing, kicking their strangely long and crooked feet again and again, like a child throwing a tantrum. Soon they had started to reach us, and I saw them grab Antonio, heaving his massive body across the trail and throwing him to the ground. Others saw the opportunity and leapt towards him, their fangs gleaming in the artificial light. They began to bite at his face and neck. "Get away from him," I screamed, slamming the last slug into the gun and running forward. I began firing, but in my excitement, the first shot went high and blew apart a tree, sending chunks of bark and splinters in every direction. The next one hit the creature that bent over Antonio's neck, entering the back of its head and continuing down towards the forest floor. The shot missed Antonio himself by only a foot or so, but it had to be done. I had no better angle to fire from at the time. The creature fell over Antonio, but another one bent over his chest, and I saw with horror that he had bitten a chunk from his shoulder and now sucked out the spurting blood, sighing in pleasure and grinning. It looked up at me for a moment, blood staining its teeth red, its liquid eyes emanating hatred and hunger towards me. I shot it in the neck and the blue blood of its body mixed with the red of its feast, giving a technicolor hue to the life fluids that leaked out of its broken and dying body. I kicked the creatures off of Antonio. They felt surprisingly light, like lifting the body of a child. Though they were taller than any man in our group, their emaciated bodies didn't seem to have an ounce of fat, as if they had been starved for weeks and then released to feed on whatever they found. The last ranger in our group, a new and very young-looking man by the name of Roger, ran past shooting at something in the forest, hollering and laughing. I registered it for a moment and then a scream took me back to the present. Dean shrieked at me, "Behind you!" I spun, finding 3 more of the creatures standing there, blue saliva foaming from their mouths. Their sharp teeth gnashed at the air, tasting the meat that stood in front of them before it had even entered their mouth, and they rushed at me at once. I fired 3 times and hit 2 of them, but the 3rd shot went high and the creature was on me, knocking me to the ground. I knew that I had no more shells in my shotgun by this point, having fired all 6 rounds. I held onto the shotgun and tried to use it as a weapon. Turning it sideways, I used it like a club, forcing it against the creature's thin, long neck. Its head came down towards my face, snapping and breathing rotten fumes into my mouth. I tasted its saliva as it dripped down onto my lips, a taste like rancid meat and chemicals. I spat, pushing with all my strength, but it continued to get closer until its face and its many sharp fangs stood only a fraction of an inch from my own. We looked into each other's eyes like infatuated lovers, but I knew the only thing this creature loved in me was my flesh, which it would rip apart as I lay there screaming and pleading for death. As my strength failed and the creature's face lunged forward, opening its maw wide, its head exploded, sending a waterfall of cerulean blue pouring down over my mouth and nose. I felt pieces of its skin stuck to mine, and soon I held only a lifeless corpse by the neck with my shotgun. Spitting and wrenching, I rolled to my side, wiping my eyes with my jacket sleeve. I looked up and saw Dean standing there, a black 30-06 Remington in his hands. He smiled at me and gave me his hand. "Dang," I said, spitting on the ground and nearly throwing up as I tasted the blood at the back of my throat. "I guess you could have waited longer, Dean," he shrugged. "Oh, they're gone," he said, showing me the bodies of a few dozen blackened monstrosities laying on the ground. The rest of them fled into the woods. I doubt that's the last that we'll see of them, though, and I would have shot it sooner, but Allie had one on her back, literally. It jumped on her like it wanted a piggyback ride, and it bit into her shoulder and sucked some of her blood. I took that one out and yours as quickly as I could, and then I remembered Antonio. "Oh, where is he?" I asked, goosebumps rising on my skin. "Is he?" "He's still alive," Dean said, his smile fading. He pointed to Antonio on the ground. Allie stood by his side, applying pressure to the gaping wound on his shoulder. I could see pieces of his bone through it. His right ear was gone and he had blood pouring from a scalp wound. He breathed fast, raising and lowering his arms and calling out for his wife. Allie calmed him. "We're getting you help," she said. "You're going to be okay. It doesn't look like any major blood vessels got severed. Thank God." "How the heck are we supposed to get him out of here?" I asked. I tried my walkie-talkie, remembering Dean's story about how his had failed at the critical moment when he needed help, but this time it worked. I heard the voice of a female ranger come through, and it sounded like an angel to me in that time of desperation. "Antonio Brown, the head ranger, is seriously injured," I said. "We need an immediate medical evac. We are on the Loggerhead Trail, right before it meets the Angel Trace mountain circuit." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry to tell you, but there's nowhere to land any sort of helicopter in that area," she said. "I think you already knew that, though. The best chance to get him out of there quickly is with an ATV with an attached trailer. but that's going to be a bumpy ride. Is he critically injured, do you think, or? Look, I'm not a doctor, I said, but he has blood all over him. He's missing an ear and a piece of his shoulder, and he has a massive scalp laceration. Allie doesn't seem to think that he has any arteries severed, but she isn't exactly a doctor either. And what about everyone else? I've already called in the paramedics and they're on their way. Another ranger is setting up the ATV attachment with blankets for Antonio, so we can pull him out of there to safety. Are there any other injuries? I looked at Allie with her bleeding shoulder. I had a few scrapes and cuts on me, but considering the circumstances, I considered those nothing at all. Dean looked totally fine, as if he had just come out of the ranger station to go on a moonlit stroll. And then I looked around, lowering the walkie-talkie suddenly. "Where's the new guy?" I asked loudly. They all turned to me, even Antonio. We had 5 people. We had Roger, that young ranger, in the back. "Where is he?" Dean shrugged. "Maybe he ran off when the fighting started," I asked helpfully. I mean, he didn't exactly sign up for this. I don't think most people would want to start a new job like this, to be honest. "No," Allie said, frowning. "He was next to me when the attack started. I saw him shooting. He had a 12-gauge Mossberg. It was so loud every time he fired it, my ears were ringing. And then..." She shook her head. "And by the time that thing jumped on me, he wasn't there. Maybe he got dragged away. God, I hope not. I hope he just ran back to the station." "Calvin," the ranger asked on the other end of the walkie-talkie. "Did we lose you?" I raised it to my lips hesitantly. "I'm not sure how to say this, but I think Roger may be gone. I don't even know if he's still alive. You should call the police and get some search helicopters going." I didn't add, however, that the chances of any helicopter finding him alive or dead were slim. If those creatures had dragged him off, we might find bones stripped of flesh, or maybe, more likely, nothing at all. "That was unreal," I said once we were back at the station. A Lifestar helicopter had taken Antonio and Allie to the hospital to be stitched up and given shots for any infections. I didn't really know Roger, as he was always quiet and it had just started a couple of weeks ago, but I felt a sense of guilt for him as well. Dean came towards me, putting his hand on my shoulder. "We can't give up," he said. "Your wife may still be alive." I nodded, staring off through the window at the dark forest outside. "I'm going back," I said. "Tonight, I don't have any time to waste. I'll take a different trail, and if my wife is alive, then the way to find her is out there, I know it. I think it's at that cabin." "Aren't there police guarding the cabin?" he asked, and I nodded. "So they say," I said bitterly. "I'm going." "I'll come with you," he said, looking determinedly at me. "Why in the world would you want to come with me? You realize I'll probably die, right?" he shrugged. "I'm not so sure of that, but maybe we could all die tonight, I guess. I'm still coming though, and let's bring more guns this time." I nodded, smiling slightly. We went to the armory, and I still had my 20-gauge shotgun on my backpack, with slugs and shells inside. I also grabbed 2 pistols, a Ruger Super Red Hawk and a Smith & Wesson Model 500. Dean grabbed a Judge, a pistol that fires shotgun shells, and a 50 Action Express. We filled our packs with more ammo, strapping the pistols to our belts. It all felt extremely heavy to me, and I knew that it would slow us down, but I didn't want to risk running out of bullets so fast this time. We also each grabbed a large Bowie knife, strapping them next to the pistols. I put a few bottles of water in my pack, giving a few to Dean, and threw in some peanut butter and crackers for good measure. I wasn't expecting to be out long after all. We set off, the night seeming darker than ever. Mostly we walked in silence, listening to the chirping of bugs. My light illuminated an owl that flew down in the middle of the trail. It looked at both of us with disdain and then flew off again. "You know, owls are omens in many cultures," Dean said. Omens of what? I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. It depends, I guess. In Asia, sometimes they signify good fortune and luck, but the Native Americans and others often thought of them as omens of death or bad luck. Great, I said, frowning. Well, I don't believe in that crap anyways. I make my own luck. He laughed. That's a good mindset, he said. If only it were true. We got to the cabin in good time. Other than the owl, we saw nothing on the way. The forest seemed silent and sleeping, or perhaps just observing, wondering what we would do next. I saw the windowless cabin ahead, standing aloof in the silent dark night. It looked eerie, the door standing open, as if beckoning us inside. Splatters of dark, dried blood still showed on the threshold and the front of the door, contrasting heavily with the white wood and the LED light. Isn't there supposed to be police protection? I asked, confused. I thought they had a cop out here or something. That's what they told me, Dean said, frowning. He raised his gun, walking forward slowly. This is Park Ranger Dean identifying myself, he yelled loudly. Do not shoot, I repeat. We work for the park. Please respond if you can hear me. The echoes faded into the trees, but I heard nothing. I walked side by side with Dean, then started sprinting forwards towards the open door. Something was wrong, and I knew it. I peered inside and saw the body of a police officer crucified against the wall. Large nails were driven through his wrists, drops of fresh blood still falling quietly to the wooden floor below. His eyelids were missing, cut or bitten off, giving him a look of perpetual surprise and terror. He had been disemboweled, his intestines hanging down like the leaves of a weeping willow. And from behind us I heard laughter. Turning around, I saw Roger, the new ranger, dressed in a black robe and surrounded by dozens of the thin, emaciated creatures. He smiled, his boyish blue eyes turning cold and insane as he showed all his teeth. My friends, you've come back. Thank you for that. My creatures need to feed, and your bodies will make delicious meals for them. Why are you doing this? I asked him, stepping back and slowly flicking the safety off my shotgun with my pointer finger. And where's Stacy? Roger laughed. Your wife is somewhere safe, I can assure you, he said, his face a mask of insanity and evil. She is being transformed, she is becoming something more than human and greater than humanity ever imagined. With my help, she'll live forever. Would you like to join her? I'd rather die, I said, raising my shotgun and pointing it at his head. He smiled. Oh, if you kill me, your wife will die, I assure you that, Roger said, pushing his blonde hair to the side. She'll die slowly, probably starving. She is in a place that no one will ever find her. Only I know where she's being held. But it's your choice. Do we not all have free will? The creatures around him stood as still as statues, each of their blood-red eyes focusing directly on me. If I hadn't seen them move earlier, I might have thought they were simply grotesque Halloween decorations. They didn't even seem to breathe. And then I realized perhaps they didn't. What are these things? I said, pointing to the blackened, emaciated bodies that surrounded him. Some sort of black magic. He shrugged. Black magic is just a word, my friend. There is no such thing as white or black magic. There is only power, and those with the will to change the world. As a great man once said, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I shook my head. I have no idea what that means. Do what thou wilt, he said, his eyes blazing with intensity now. Do what you will. When God created the universe in his infinite energy and power, he willed it to be. In the space of a moment it came out of the void. I too have a will. We are made in his image after all, and my will has been honed and intensified until soon I will approach the power of angels, and one day even God himself. So what's your actual plan here? I asked. You want to create a race of monsters that go around killing anyone they want at random. You want to take innocent people and subject them to God and knows what kind of horrors, all because of your free will. Yes, exactly, he said, his voice raising in excitement, a fanatical gleam shining in his eyes. And I make myself the ruler of all, starting with his infinitesimal state and moving on to the country and eventually the world. Can you imagine what we could accomplish without nationalism separating people into competing groups, without countries constantly fighting over resources? What if we had a leader with a true vision, one who could unify everyone and help to push humanity towards the next stage of its evolution, perhaps even towards colonizing the rest of the galaxy? But it all starts here with you and me. So I'll ask you, would you join me? I looked over at Dean, who stood close to me, looking pale and terrified. His eyes flicked from Roger to me, as if he were watching a sports game rather than an insane spectacle of death and black magic. I'd rather die, I said, my heart pounding in my chest, my mouth going dry. Roger's face turned into a mask of fury as he screamed for his minions to attack. I fired the shotgun, but they swarmed in front of him, and the slug hit one of the burnt abominations in the chest instead. I swore, turning to run into the cabin. Dean, let's go, I screamed at the top of my lungs. I looked back and saw him standing there, shell-shocked and vacant-looking. Dean, I said again, and his head snapped towards me. He began sprinting as the creatures closed in around him. I had already reached the cabin door and waited for him, breathing fast. I raised the shotgun and shot one of the creatures only a few feet behind Dean. The slug broke through its leg, sending splinters of bone and blue blood spurting into the earth below. Roger screamed in rage behind us, an incomprehensible roar of fury and madness. As if on cue, the creatures started screaming too, a shrill, maddening sound like someone being burned alive. They didn't seem to need to breathe, and the screaming went on for an inhuman length of time. I pulled Dean into the cabin quickly, slamming the door shut. A blood-stained padlock hung from a nail on the left side of the door. Looking quickly down, I saw a metal ring connecting the door to the wall. I pushed all my body weight against the door and took the open padlock in my hands, feeling the cold metal in the sticky, congealed blood. A sense of revulsion and horror overtook me, but I brushed it aside. With fumbling fingers, I slipped the padlock's shackle through the door's ring, but at that moment a creature smashed into the other side, sending me sprawling on the ground. My shotgun went flying, sliding across the rough planks of the blood-stained floor and stomping beneath the crucified body of the cop. His intestines swayed back and forth from the force of the gun. The door flew open and I saw the leering faces and the red bloody eyes of the abominations as they stared in, dripping long strands of saliva onto the dirt below. Kill them all! Roger shrieked in an insane voice, and the creatures rushed in. Dean began shooting and I pulled out both my pistols, pressing the thumb levers on the holsters and releasing them. I started shooting madly, and their screams turned from fury to pain as they fell on the floor, their blue blood mixing with the red, coagulated stains below them. Within seconds, we had blocked the door with bodies. The cabin was small, barely even a room, though the wood was strong and fairly new, totally free from rot or holes. The only way in and out was through the door. With the narrow doorway blocked by a dozen blackened corpses, the rest of the creatures behind them tried to push through but made no progress. One tried climbing over the pile of corpses and I shot it in the head as soon as it peeked through. The rest didn't follow his example. I heard their high-pitched whines and screams outside, and Roger's much deeper one bellowing orders. "Get some dry leaves, twigs, and logs," he said. "If they don't come out, we'll burn them out. No witnesses, no loose ends." He said this last part as if to himself, his voice slowing down and becoming reflective, almost meditative in its quality. I turned to Dean, terrified and exasperated. His face reflected the emotions that I felt. I regretted ever coming out here. We would most likely die and my wife would be left in the hands of that psychopath outside, unless the police made some sort of unlikely break in the case and found her. "Well, Dean," I said slowly and sadly, "I think this is the end unless you have any other plans." "I sure don't. I guess we could start moving the corpses and try to fight our way out. That's probably what we'll have to do." Dean shrugged, his movements apathetic. He looked as if he also had given up hope, and then a miracle had occurred. I heard a voice that I had not heard in what seemed like an eternity. It was the voice that I had heard through my walkie-talkies, the ones talking about dead stars. What had he said to me? As if in a flash, my subconscious repeated the strange words that I had heard. I remembered as if I were there, as if I had gone back in time and stood in the woods, calling for help with a corpse walking up behind me. "Get out of there and never come back. That cabin is for the sinners, those who worship the dead stars, those who have offered their lives to the Ancient Ones." The Ancient Ones, yes, that is what he or it had said. That stuck with me for some reason. I thought of Roger and his bizarre ideas on will. It reminded me of Hitler, honestly. Hadn't they made a movie about him called The Triumph of the Will? Roger clearly had an obsession with the power of the will. In fact, I thought perhaps his obsession had come from black magic, but I couldn't be sure. These thoughts all flashed through my head in a fraction of a second, and I thought for a moment that I understood something ineffable, some way out of this madness. But then it was gone, and I was just a scared man, sitting in a blood-soaked cabin, listening to an otherworldly voice. "You and your cult have trespassed on holy ground," the voice said, booming and godlike. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from all around me and even inside the cabin itself. It shook the ground and sent the crucified body of the officer swaying again, his intestines slowly moving from side to side. "You have committed horrors and disrupted the peace of the dead. You and your creatures are doomed." "You have no power over me," Roger said, his voice seeming faint and almost childlike in comparison to the voice of the other. "Come out here and try it, don't hide. Let's see your true form." The voice laughed. Dean began moving some of the corpses, trying to look out the door. I got up and went to his side. I saw the creatures surrounding the cabin had vanished. They now stood in a circle around Roger. His white face was the only color, a contrast to the blackened bodies of his minions, and the jet-black robes that he wore. He looked like a dead star in infinite space, his skin lifeless and pale. "The Ancient Ones use you as a puppet," the voice said. I peered around and saw Dean doing the same, but I could find no source for it. "I too have an army, but mine are not drawn from the dead or the despicable art of necromancy. I use the forest and its many secrets. And who do you think is the stronger? The dead or those with a connection to the living and breathing holy ground of this place?" Roger's eyes widened as hundreds of animals came out of the woods, a stampede of fur and feathers. I saw bears rushing in the front on all fours, approaching the emaciated, blackened victims of Roger and standing on their back legs, roaring and clawing. They swiped at their chests and faces, leaving deep gouges before lunging for their throats, and with a quick side-to-side motion, ripping the heads clean off. Roger turned and began to run, his remaining minions following suit. The animals chased after them, and within a minute, everything had started to go silent again. We kept pulling bodies out of the doorway, and by the time we got outside, no one was left, except of what remained of the monsters. We made it back to the cabin in record time, moving quickly with our guns drawn. I saw police cars and FBI agents everywhere, and they started moving into the woods with searchlights and dogs. Antonio was back, bandaged up and looking haggard and pale, but otherwise okay. He came up to me and Dean. "We know it was Roger. We're looking for him now," he said. "The FBI and state police just searched all known properties associated with them. We found the blood of your wife, Cal. I'm sorry, but we didn't find a body. It's a lot of blood. Too much for somebody to lose and survive." His words stunned me into silence. I had held on to the glimmer of hope that Stacy was alive, that we would just need to capture Roger and then we could find out where she was held prisoner. I started shaking and almost collapsed, but Dean caught me. He pulled me over to a bench and sat me down. "Take a minute," he said, "and just breathe." I sat there for what seemed like hours, watching the police and FBI agents pass by, going in and out of the woods. After a few hours, the team came back. Antonio was outside talking to the police chief of the town. The team went up to him. "We found the body of Roger Gray," the police officer in charge said. "Looks to be an animal attack. There were all sorts of blackened corpses around him. We don't really know what they are. Looks like he dug them out of a graveyard and burned them for some reason. The whole scene as well, it's bizarre. Don't know what to make of it. There were no animals around when we went, but the tracks looked like hundreds of bears, deer, owls, crows, and others passed right through there and attacked him." He shook his head. "I swear this job gets weirder every day." I went home that night. Everywhere that I looked, I saw traces of Stacy in the bedsheets that she had chosen, the pictures she hung on the wall, even the dishes that she had washed a couple of days ago. It all seemed like years ago now. Little did I know, but I would see her again. My insomnia got worse after that night with Roger and the strange voice in the woods. I had always had trouble sleeping, but now I didn't sleep at all. I would sit up night after night, drinking scotch and watching the 24 Hours news channel, or just there and stare out the window. And then after a week, I saw something strange. It was Stacy, my wife. I would have recognized her anywhere, but at the same time, it wasn't her. She had the same eyes, yes, and the same hair, even the same clothes as when I had last seen her. But now she was covered in blood, and dragged one leg behind her, weeping and gnashing her teeth. I saw her lunge down and grab a raccoon from next to the garbage, biting its neck as it squealed and thrashed in her arms. After a few seconds, its thrashing died down and then it stopped. She sucked the blood into her open mouth, her eyes shutting in pleasure, and then she dropped it and turned to me and smiled. I couldn't believe my eyes. I ran outside, but by the time that I got there, she was gone. Only a dead raccoon with its neck broken remained at my feet. I took a leave of absence from work and began to search the woods. It was the only place that I could think of, the forest where all this strangeness had begun. My intuition guided me, and my heart told me that if I was going to find Stacy or what was left of her, it would be in that forest. I would return home every night, disconsolate and broken-hearted. After a month of this, I returned home and turned on the news, pouring myself a shot of whiskey and sitting back in my recliner. The corpses were found in a campsite next to Windermere Lake, within the Temple National Park. The broadcaster said as I sat straight up in my chair. That was where I worked. I knew exactly where Windermere Lake was. Hadn't I hiked it every day? The lake itself was only 3 miles from the cabin where this had all started. That cabin of horror. They apparently had their throats cut and the blood drained from their bodies. The broadcaster continued. Authorities are tight-lipped on this, but one officer told our reporter that 8 people are now dead or missing. The governor has responded saying that they will close down the park if. I turned the TV off, getting up and going into my bedroom. I got dressed and put on my hiking shoes. After all, I now knew the reanimated corpse of my dead wife roamed the forest, attacking and killing innocent people. Roger was dead, but there was more work to do. I saw my wife's smiling face in my mind, and I remember the way she smelled, like perfume and flowers. I quickly blinked back tears and grabbed my shotgun, strapping a pistol to my waist. No matter how long it took, I would bring her down and hopefully free the forest of this evil. It's been 3 years now and still I haven't had success. To this day, I still go out at night, roaming the trails. I've found bodies skinned alive with limbs twisted around tree branches, and campers with their faces eaten off, leaving just a mask of reddened bone behind. I'll never know if they're all from Stacy or if somebody else lives there, but I have a mission and I'm determined to fulfill it. I know that my wife's soul has moved on and that something else has taken over Stacy's body. Whatever shell remains is just an extension of Roger's satanic magic, his necromancy and evil, and I won't stop hunting until I know she is at peace.